Welcome all to the Architects Roundtable. Architects Roundtable is a part of the week-long celebrations that we are having and also other events that we are having for the decade of the School of Environment and Architecture. I'm Dushyant Asher and I teach at C. Welcome everyone. We will start the Architects Roundtable by a set of introductions, a quick one. They're already known figures in the discipline. I'll just go through everyone's intro. Jasmine Saluja from Plural. Jasmine is an architect and urban designer and a founding partner at Plural, an urban design research and policy investigation laboratory, investigating global policies that shape London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Delhi, and Mumbai. She co-authored the book Six Metros, Urban Planning and Implementation Compared. So welcome, Jasmine. We have Mayuri with us. Mayuri is a director at Made in Mumbai. It's a young design practice involved in architecture, urban design, interiors, and landscapes. They currently engage in designing public infrastructure projects across, many state governments and across the country. So, welcome, Mayuri. We have Pranav Naik. Pranav is the founding partner at Pomegranate Studio, and he's worked on several urban design projects in Mumbai, including many competitions that he's won and also executed two very interesting projects here. We have Rohit Shinkre with us. From Rohit is a practicing architect, urbanist, researcher, and educator based in Mumbai, and has successfully delivered design and planning projects for diverse users from communities and corporates uh, to consular missions in India and overseas. He's a professor and former HOD at the Rachna Sansad Academy of Architecture. Welcome, Rohit. We have Samir De Monte. Samir De Monte is the founder of SDM Architects and is involved in sustainable design, institutional building, master planning. Samir is also part of a collaborative practice of several Mumbai architects called Bandra Collective. Um, we have Urmi Kenia from Urban Center, Mumbai. Urmi is an urban designer and spatial planner with over 20 years of experience in private and public projects. Along with her own private practice, she's the director at Urban Center, Mumbai, a collective space for research and communication on urban planning, urban design, conservation, and sustainable urban development involving various stakeholders and agencies in Mumbai metropolitan region. And we have lastly Ketki Tare. Ketki is an architect and urban designer and has co-founded Bombay 61, an innovative and experimental urban solutions think tank from 2013, which facilitates urban design and research projects with public participation. So welcome everyone. I will ask Rupali to pose the first provocation.
So thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Rupali Gupte and I teach here and also part of a small group that has founded the school. Many of my co-conspirators are here in the audience. So I think this is an important panel for us, particularly because we understand that many of us are shaped by cities. The way we've grown up, the spaces and cities that we've used. Uh, in some ways we've been participating in a larger commons of all kinds, commons where there are public spaces, commons which are community spaces that are beyond private property. So we've not been shaped by our homes actually, because most of our times we've spent outside, right? But now at this kind of juncture where we are at, and at sea we are seeing, we're a decade old, and we look around us and things are changing. In some ways the urban realm is depleting in many ways. But also what is interesting is that I mean you guys are invited here because you all have in some ways located yourself in a place where you're not letting that go. You're not letting that kind of depleting urban realm just go just like that. So in some ways you're making some kind of dents into it, trying in some ways to make wedges into this, and that's exactly why you all are invited here. So I think if we kind of start thinking about that, if we can just extend this the introduction that Dushant has done right now with small bios, but also if you can all maybe do one round, one kind of introductory round, because a lot of the audience probably know you but don't really know your work that well. So if we can do one round of introductions through really kind of speaking about your work in some ways trying to shape the commons. What is it that you do? What is the philosophy of your practice? So I mean, this we'll start with a biographical note, but maybe the kind of move into larger ideas of starting to look at the city. So maybe if you can start with Rohit, you want to start?
Afternoon, I'm Rohit Shinkre.
I don't think we can hear. Can you hear? Switch it on.
Hello, hello.
Working.
Now it goes off. Hello. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you for calling me here. Yeah, it's been some time. 2 years ago, I had come here for some other event. So briefly, my profile: I'm a practicing architect and also an educator, and both these caps are important. The practice feeds the teaching, and the teaching also feeds the practice. The practice is very diverse. In the last 25 years, we have worked on anything from metro stations to furniture to set designs. So it's very intentionally a very multidisciplinary practice. Uh, so and that's the way I like it to be. In terms of what Rupali mentioned about cities that shape up, so definitely Mumbai and Paris have been the two cities that have shaped my views on urbanity and also on design. And my earlier practice experience was in Paris, and the recent one, when I say recent, last 25 years, has been mostly in Mumbai. And so it was a shift from a city where, since the topic of today's thing is commoning architecture, so my initial professional experience was in a city where the role of design is very well recognized and established, to a city where it is not yet there. I mean, and so it was an interesting shift, and that shift has kind of influenced some of the choices of practice that, yeah, which I'll detail about. No, this is okay. Is that better? Yeah. Working? Why is it not? Yeah. So very brief. There are just 4 or 5 slides. So this is the first one. This is a very brief overview of the practice, the various kinds of project that we have done. So it goes from campus design to office designs to houses to furniture. Not everything is here, but so it kind of gives you an overview of, and it's interesting to work at different scales, because I think the engagement with what you have to deal with is different, and that's what makes it interesting. So related to today's topic, I'll just mention some of the projects that we have worked on. Delhi Metro was a big. I have worked on planning in the Delhi Metro, little bit of Mumbai Metro, and also on Chennai Metro. Delhi was a very satisfying experience. because a lot of the suggestions we made were actually implemented, not in totality, but in bits and pieces. So, and that is one of the things that I think when you do public work, you have to accept that nobody is going to accept everything that you propose, that there is a lot of friction, there is a lot of opposing views. So some of the stuff that you propose does go through and a lot of it does not. But uh, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, other people have other views and those also get counted. So one of the biggest things that we were able to do in the Delhi were two contributions. One was to it was the second phase, so there was already a series of stations already built, and one of our suggestions was to create a double height volume, which was a big deviation from the first phase projects. And though a lot of our smaller design solutions were not accepted, this was accepted, and I think it makes a big difference to the 7, 8 stations in which it was implemented. So that is a kind of achievement. And the other thing which we managed to do was to do really, that's the little image that you see here, that we used I mean, we got everybody on board with all the services designs to make sure that we didn't have, because that's one of the things that we had noticed which had gone wrong in the first phase, that there were lots of services which were kind of, very badly integrated in the project. So given the importance of services in a project like that, that was one of the things that we used to try and give some orderly design. And the other major submission, our work we did on was in 2013, where there was this new National Street Vendors Act, and I was advising the Mumbai Municipal Corporation to see how it could be implemented. So the act was very detailed, but it didn't really have, I mean, the spatial aspects of that act were quite random. I mean, they have just randomly decided that 1 meter by 1 meter space would be given. And on what basis was it decided, etc., was not very clear. So, and also it said that the municipal corporation had to appoint town vending committees to decide. How would the town vending committees decide, again, is not very clear. So our idea was to try and create a kind of common base based on which these vending committees could decide on hawking policies in each part of the city. Then there are some public projects, landscape projects, architectural projects. So one is extension of the botanical gardens at the Baikala Zoo. This is done. This now about it was finished just after the pandemic. So this was a project which we actually did through the college, through the Rachna Sansad design cell, and we did it entirely through the standard municipal tenders and all that. So a lot of learning, but at the same time, we were managed to. I think that's one of the things that I mean, there are very rigid processes, but if there are things that you think are important, then there is a way to kind of work through them. It is still possible. It is tedious. I mean, Pranav will also know, Samir will also know, but it is still possible to try and get things done. As long as you have some, open-minded officers in front of you and you can do things. The other, the two black and white images are the Chandanwadi crematorium, which is under construction, and the other two are these funny-looking structures as this the security towers that are required at Chowpatty. Now, so I don't really know if it is really required, but it's a court order that we need to have security towers at the beach. And what we got after the zoo work, we got a call from the local commissioner saying that the designs we are seeing are quite bad, and would you like to suggest something else? And it is a very sensitive site because it is there is a high-powered committee for the Chowpatty and the entire Marine Drive. There is a heritage committee, so to get through a design, And there were very specific demands of the police, of the municipal officers, of the municipal corporation, because during Visarjan, etc., this is a major crowd. So it was a very interesting process to try and do something, and in a very, very difficult site because it's on the beach. So, so there is the visible part of the tower, but the major innovation was actually in the foundations, because to try and find a foundation system which will not disrupt the entire beach for a long time, and also after construction. So the lessons we drew from this is that innovation is possible as long as it is not kind of gratuitous. I mean, it is, if you are able to identify real problems, then you can suggest new solutions. For example, they were suggesting that we should have timber foundations for this. That was the conclusion of the BMC engineers, because it is under the sand and salt exposure and things like that. Without realizing that to execute timber foundations, they would have to make huge pits, and so what we finally used was stainless steel screw piles, which are literally like piles which are drilled like a screw into the soil, and which is really minimal. And so even though it was not something that they were aware of, they were quite ready to change their. So I think we do have a role in trying to challenge some of the set ideas. We do have a role in maybe challenging even the capabilities of. I mean, when we did this walkway in zoo, they said the last time they used solid timber in a garden was very long time ago. And so, but they did accept. I mean, so it is interesting. I mean, it is worth that little tussle. And the Chandanwadi, I will not share too much about it because I would like the project to be finished. The common line between all these projects is that you should minimum count about 5 years. Between, you have to be extremely patient between the time when you start and the time when it kind of reaches some kind of completion, because lots of procedures, lots of decisions. And I think we have to accept that, because we are a democracy, and democracy comes with its slowness, you know. Some of the interesting projects going on right now is, this is a proposal we had made in 2013 about creating a pedestrian seafront promenade between Worli to Mahim, right? So that it's an exclusively pedestrian promenade. And there are various parts. There are sand beaches. And where there are no sand beaches, there is this horrible tetrapods which have been installed. And as a result, almost more than half of that seafront is now not very easily accessible to the public. Now, tetrapods is a design which was, it's a French invention, and it was mostly like a military thing to try and protect their old forts. So it is not really very public friendly, right? In 1976, they used it for the first time in India for the Marine Drive. And since then, it is the same thing anywhere in the country where there is coastal protection to be made. That is what they are using, right? Without any consideration for other aspects of what it can do. So the first meeting we had with the local municipal corporation was in 2013. After that, we have had meetings and presentations to all successive governments, all successive municipal commissioners. Everybody agreed that this is really nice, but it couldn't take off anywhere. It also couldn't take off anywhere because of problems of a different nature, because the coast, the BMC says that we can't do anything on the coast. So this is not our jurisdiction. And the people whose jurisdiction this is, they say that public space is none of our business. That's BMC. We are only here to protect the coast, and it doesn't matter to us whether public can reach the sea or not. So finally now there is, I mean, in this huge rush to do things before elections, there is some budgets allotted, and some good municipal officers who are keen on getting this executed. And the reason why they are keen is that they have a local stake. That they are from that, and I think that's one of the things that matters. I mean, a lot of the times we don't realize that, even architects don't realize that having a stake in the territories that you are proposing some things is important. I mean, for me also, this is the place that I know well. I've grown up here, uh, so that I think is an important aspect of things. Some of the other projects are very small, but I think they are important. One was, there was a wall that was there between that E. Moses Road and the race course. So this was just a very casual suggestion to the then municipal commissioner of the ward that, why don't you just open up this wall? I mean, otherwise you have, I mean, it was like kind of a public urinary over that the entire wall was, and just making that wall uh, transparent. You see the other image where you have a metallic grill. So so this was the earlier condition, and generally you just had taxis parked all along here, and this was like a like a toilet. And now this is the same condition of the place now, which is, and we didn't actually design anything. Our only suggestion was to just to change the compound wall. And I think that little gesture has entirely changed the nature of the whole street, because you suddenly get a visual expanse over hundreds of acres, which is very rare in Mumbai. We didn't actually involve ourselves in any of this design because there was no need to. The biggest idea was this, changing the wall. Uh, then there's a huge garden in Worli called Jambori Garden. It's a very historically known garden. There are parts of our freedom struggle which have happened there. Uh, so there again, our suggestions were not something visible because that's what people generally like. We just suggested passive drainage system so that because this playground is very important for a very dense surrounding, and a good passive drainage actually ensured that the kids here could play across the year. That the playground was not mushy and full of water. So again, once it is done, people might say, "What did you do here?" But it actually, the fact that kids can use it for through the monsoon is great. And similar in the G North ward, we actually made lots of small suggestions of this nature. Another one which was on Pochkanwala Road, there is a garden on the top and there is a kind of retention wall. So we just suggested a different profile for the retention wall, and it is now a highly used space by all, and it's open to everybody. So I'll just end my small presentation this way. I mean, generally design, you have these two things: what is ideal and what is possible. And in public work, in the public domain, this really is what one should be well aware of. We need to have ideals, but we need to also understand what can be done, and so this image is basically the perfect mathematical model of a cobweb, which all cobwebs on the planet Earth are kind of genetically coded to make, but they never actually get to make exactly this cobweb. They try and make whatever cobweb they can in this condition that they are in, and I think that's what's key about doing work in the public domain. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohit. That was great. You know, I really like seeing that the project where there's nothing visual about it, because as architects, we really have to resist the temptation to be these fantastic, guys who parachute in and do something, like a design hero kind of a role. it's very tempting to play that role, but I think what he did was perfect. He saw something that was really required there and focused on that. So it's a great pointer to take from that. Yeah. I'll be quick because I think there's a lot of us to get through. So I'll tell you a bit about my route. I took a slightly different route to a typical architect. So when I graduated, I went and worked in a structural engineer's office. So I actually worked for Shirish Patel. Jasmine knows him well. And I don't know, I'm not to this day not sure exactly why I did it. I think I felt I didn't understand structures properly and that I felt that I needed to in order to become a good architect. So I went there, and luckily he's one of the most brilliant engineers to exist in the world actually. You know, he can solve any problem in structures to an approximation in I would say 30 seconds. With Jasmine, he's brilliant. So it was a great. So it was great for me to actually learn that. And then I set up his architectural department, and we did lots of interesting projects. I did aircraft hangars, and we did factories for BMW and Skoda and lots of other interesting things. And did earthquake resistant housing, stuff like that. And then I started to I quit at some point and set up my own practice. And in my own practice, I also realized that what interested me was the intersection of architecture and engineering. So we try and explore that wherever possible to make structures that are beautifully engineered, where the engineering and the architecture, there's not a specific line where you can tell them apart. It's not always not always easy or practical to do that. But I think what interests me is where you can't tell the line, or there's no dividing line where architecture begins and structures end. So that's what really interests me. That's one of the things that interests me. We've always had an interest in doing sustainable work, so going back to basics and looking at things very fundamentally, and designing a building that works. For example, if you look at the sun's energy in India and most places close to the equator, it's about 1 kilowatt per square meter. That's how much energy there is in the sun rays. So if you visualize that, that's like having a small geyser. A small geyser is like 1 kilowatt of energy, on every square meter of the building surface, including the roof and the walls. So if you visualize things like that, it helps you to kind of arrive at a solution where you're designing the building envelope in a way that it doesn't pick up heat. So it's good to visualize things, go back to first principles, think things through. And that's one of the things that we like to do in the studio. I think we've been a little lucky to get opportunities to work across a range of different sectors. We've done some conservation work. We've worked on the Jaisalmer Fort. We've done urban projects. We've done industrial buildings. I think we're lucky to have worked across different forms of transportation. So we worked with aircraft hangars, we've done floating restaurants, we've worked with train stations, and some road projects. So it's a good, and we're now talking to a space company as well to do some work for them. So it's a good kind of mix of stuff to work with. One other thing we also do is in the practice is we do audits of existing buildings. So what we do there is we do a very detailed audit of a building that's already been under occupation, and we give the owner or the client a kind of report as to whether it's performing well after 10 or 15 years of its life, and whether it conforms to current norms in terms of fire safety. Indian codes are actually pretty good in terms of defining fire safety norms, but I find that most architects don't know much about what's in the National Building Code. So I would urge all of you to get into that, because life safety is paramount. Hello, hello. Yeah, so it's important for us to get into issues of life safety, but none of us really think about that. And and as architects, we're also kind of we design a building and then we forget about it. So it's good to actually go into a building that has been actually used for 15 years and figure out what's working well, what isn't working. So that's a good kind of learning practice. In practice, actually, one of our major clients for this is the Delhi builder called DLF. So we're actually learning from all of Hafiz's mistakes. But anyway, that's another story. But let's take it to today's topic, which is how do we engage with the public realm, right? So I think for me that was very simple. Um, as an architect and as a citizen, walking around I come from Bandra, so just walking around that and existing there, I felt that certain things could be better by simply having used those spaces, as to take the train to office every day, and as to walk around in different spaces of Bandra. So it's very simple. Why can't this be better? It's you can kind of reconstruct and rearrange the whole place in your mind, and then you say it's not that difficult. Why can't we just do something about it? So that's where the whole thing started, and the first project we undertook was to look at, there's a village in Bandra called Ranbar, which is it's a bunch of 60 or 70 houses, which are typically 100 to 120 years old. And what had happened through the years is that people started to move out. The houses started to become, subdivided because there was a single family there, and it was left to, the next generation, which divided in half, and the next generation, which divided, again into half. So it was getting quartered, and so the old character that was there was starting to be lost, and there was a lot of through traffic, which was the village was really not designed for. It was creating lots of problems. The village, in the 1960s was a very idyllic place. So we said, let's try and restore this to its original condition. And I think one of the first meetings we had was with Prasad, when he was in MMRDA. And we went back to the citizens that we actually, there's a small square there, and we made a presentation to them about how everything could be improved. You could improve the lighting. BMC doesn't cater to this kind of situations. So you have a narrow winding road, and they'll have a typical 9-meter tall street light, which is spaced at every 25 meters. So you need shorter lights at closer distances. You need street furniture. You need delineated parking spaces. You need things that are sensitive to the area. And we presented to them, and we thought they would all want it, but everybody said we don't want the place to change like that. And the reason for that is that they felt that the house was the only financial asset they owned, and they did not want it to get a heritage tag, which meant that they would not be able to kind of monetize that asset and sell out, because most comes from very basic middle class families, and the house was the only asset they owned. So we took a different tack. We said, what do you need? So they said, we need public infrastructure, we need new drainage, we need new roads. And we started with doing those things. We actually, redid all the roads, we redid all the drainage, and then we gained their trust. And that allowed us to do more and more things with them. So eventually, we kind of paved the squares with cobblestones very nicely. We introduced signage that talked about, there's a very rich history of that whole town. So we introduced signage that displayed the whole history of that space very nicely. And we did another interesting thing, which was we noticed that the road was so narrow and winding that a fire engine cannot really enter. And the houses have wooden slabs and wooden roofs. So if there's actually a fire, that would be a serious problem. So we buried a firefighting pipe, a dry firefighting pipe under the center of the road. We dug up the road, buried a dry firefighting pipe under the road, and put a connection at each end on the main road. So your firefighting engine could come and stand there and pump into this. And inside the village, there were 3 different hydrants, where the firefighters could actually connect and fight the fire. So that was, I think, probably the first of its kind in the world where anybody's done that. And we got, those 3 hydrants, we got Yale locks with 60 keys. So every house has a key. It's a common key in case there's a fire. And the fire department came and tested it out and found that it worked also. So that was a good thing. The other project we did was to look at Bandra Station. So I used to use Bandra Station every day. So I felt the area outside the station was quite chaotic, disorganized. It was one big kind of set of maybe 4 or 5 lanes of traffic. There was no safe way for pedestrians to cross. There was no organized way to get an auto. There was no proper way to have either a share auto or a private auto, and the bus stops were way under capacity. So we kind of redesigned that whole space. We took it to the government. They said yes immediately, and then they sat on it for years and years. And eventually we kept pushing, and it took about 8 years or 9 years by the time they actually started work. but they started work during the pandemic, and finally it was kind of more or less done. We did lots of interesting things there, which were still not implemented, unfortunately. We did things like, for the first time, we put maps on the bus stops, to maps of Bandra showing where the bus is going, right? We designed all of that stuff. The signs were even fabricated, but for some reason they were not put up. So these are ongoing things. So um, in addition to these two, we also formed a group of architects called Bandra Collective, which is a bunch of us. And we collectively worked on a range of different projects, including the Bandra Promenade. You know, so I'd like to probably just summarize some of our learnings from all this. One is that as a citizen, as an architect, you can make a change in the city. It's not impossible, so it's done. You know, what's good is in the past 4 or 5 years, BMC officials and other government officials are somehow keen to take up projects and execute them. And actually, money is not a problem, right? So in fact, it's the opposite. So if you go to them with a 25 lakh project, they say, yeah, we'll see. If you go to them with a 2 crore project, yeah, come, we'll start tomorrow morning. It's like. So these are some obstacles which are important, right? Which are kind of not there. I think it was quite different 10 years ago, because nobody thought that architects could do things. Nobody thought that you could change things in the city. So that these two are a welcome change. But the key obstacles I see right now is that working with BMC is quite difficult, because they're disorganized. They change their minds. They're impractical, and they look at you as somebody who's not a full-fledged design professional, but as somebody, they call it beautification, right? So which means that they will issue a tender first, they'll decide all the key items to be used, and then you just sprinkle some beauty dust over the whole thing and make it work, and it's like a surface treatment. So I think it's up to us to convince the public that there is value in what we do by, going down to the basics and reworking something fundamental. And that's what we felt was necessary when we started Bandra Collective. So we felt that in the public sphere, there's lots of money being spent, projects are being executed, but design was missing. So we thought, let's try and see if we can bring that design into the public realm. And I've been saying to them, like, it's still a long way off, because still today, the BMC doesn't think that architects or design have a place in the system. There's obviously a lot of monetary incentives for them to control everything themselves and not give up control to an architect, because they obviously have linked up with contractors and stuff like that. But I think the way we've been looking at it is that we have to start fighting the system, and we have to kind of prove that these things are important and are valuable, and then somewhere down the line, probably for the next generation or your generation, hopefully things will change.
I'll start the timer. No, I think it's interesting because, I mean, from what both of you are also saying is that cities happen. Cities happen on their own. What you do as an architect, what you kind of start doing is nudging a little bit, and some of this is visible, some of this is not. And often our kind of templates of how we otherwise look at urban space comes from, maybe other contexts, which is much more visual. But there's an underground, there's an underlayer to that, because there are contexts in cities where heritage is something that is heavily invested on, because the economy is like that, right? That's the economy. Here we have, yeah, yeah, and also because it's the the economy of the city is not heritage here. You don't have governments doling out money for people to maintain heritage. So then how do you start looking at things around? How do you look at the mechanics of how life is lived, and then start kind of operating from there? So I think that's a very interesting, we can come back to that, this discussion. And I think Jasmine, if you can just move on to Jasmine and Pranav, and then see how these are connecting.
We started Plural almost 9 years back, and it'll become a decade next year for us. And I like to start from the very beginning. I'll not take time on that. It's a good place to start, I feel. as to why, urban designers and architects are now entering this realm of public design and want to have this dialogue with the corporation and people who are, the custodian of uh, giving us that infrastructure as citizens. And when this happened, they do not understand who an urban designer is. They either understand maybe a town planner, an urban planner, an architect, like Samir said, they just want us for beautification the moment they think about architecture, if it's not in the built region. And when we are living in the city, city is supposed to be aspirational. I mean, either we are born here or we have migrated into the city and we have come here for the advantages of city life. Yet, while living in a large city like Mumbai, in a dense city like Mumbai, I think we all compromise our lifestyle, be it for commute, be it in the kind of tight spaces we live in the city. And then the question comes into the mind that why are we making this compromise? And what can we do about it? So, with these thoughts, is what we started uh, with Plural. We had been teaching a long time, both me and Urmi. And somewhere we felt this urban paradox that the advantage of the city and the compromise which we are making is an urban paradox. And if we are teaching this ahead, and what are we teaching, like Rohit said, it's ideal or what is possible, again that gap is there between what we do in practice and what we are teaching. A lot of it has changed over time, but in terms of urban design, we are still kind of recommending or engaging with the land which does not belong to us and with whom the land belongs to. The engagements which we are doing is again, talking or designing for somebody else. So even in the commons, common is not common. So what I mean to say is that within the commons, a lot of communities are there. They do not have a single voice. When we look at them in studios, many times we address them as a single entity. And when you are on the ground and doing projects with them, then you realize that the negotiations within the community is equally strong with the kind of negotiation we are doing with the corporation or the corporate or the IS officer who has the power to execute. So that is another layer of doing things. So with this, we have 4 to 5 verticals under which we perform, and under in plural. One, we do grassroots projects, which are on-ground projects, and we engage with community. The start point can be anything. It could either be a politician's imagination, it could either be a requirement coming directly from the community there. It could also be a corporator who thinks this is my immediate vote bank and I need to deliver. Or it could be another citizen from a different community who thinks this is what I don't want to see. The biases within the community. And then how you create blurring to happen, because we have been, in a way, um, throughout our education, thought that city is, people are people together, again, as one group. So we did this project almost 8 years back. Like Samir also mentioned, if you tell them that it is a 3 crore project, they'll listen to you. But if you give them a solution, which is the most logical solution for 3 lakh rupees, they will not listen to you. So we said, okay, they need to know how to spend the money, so let's give them 5 projects. So we initiated with a small feasibility study to tell them that your 5 year, you fit 5 projects and execute. Your vote bank is guaranteed in this area. So I think these kind of negotiations is equally important. And when we are, you know, doing any project, we have to learn this while on ground. So the initiative and plural is to understand these negotiations and see if terms of engagement can be established. So with each project, we have a toe, which we call terms of engagement, and we are understanding the processes on ground. And with each project, the toe becomes stronger or bigger, or and how we are putting our foot firmly on ground over these last couple of years. So we did 3 projects in Kafparet fishing village. One was a derivative of this, which was implemented the first. The sequence changes because, once you give, like Rohit also said, how much will be executed, nobody knows. I mean, once we have designed, the community can change it, the officer can change it. So it happens like that. So with this, we did one public park. It was done before pandemic but opened after pandemic. It's behind World Trade Center. And it's a beautiful place, I would say, because the community has taken over the park. They have festivals where you have 500 people coming on a Sunday morning. The culture of singing in the park started there. And a group called Soundrise was formulated there, which is now, all across the city they are performing. So, so that kind of solved a lot of problems for which that park was designed. It was again done under the beautification project, but the issues with the community was safety, were redundancy, was drug abuse, a lot of things for which we said you can renovate the park, you can re-renovate it, the problems will not go till the time you reprogram it. So that is one project. Then from that, through blurring boundaries, when somebody said, I don't want to see this, so what do? So we created another footpath. The design of the footpath is something which is pleasing to the other side, people living on the other side of the road. And and then we are doing a public promenade. All of this in sequence is coming around the Cuff Parade Fishing Village. But through these bottom-up initiatives, we can do something in Bandra, the other Cuff Parade, but the city collectively does not, kind of doing this is one initiative. So what changes can we bring in the system? That is the larger objective behind our practice. So we believe that if the corporator or the officer engages with us, sees how things are happening differently, will they bring the change in the system? Because no much how much advocacy we do or activism we do, they have different connotations to each. But something which you experience and you have the power to deliver, you will do it. Our end objective is to get the product to the people, not to take the credit for it. So we are doing these kind of changes and subtle changes, maybe in tender, one clause is changed for the next project. Nobody knows why it happened, but we know that during this process, we sensitized the person who was on the other side of the table. So these are the initiatives which we are doing as social experiments. Other thing is for the large scale is through change through policy matters. How do you make the city affordable for everyone when we know that we still have 40%, I mean, more than population, 40% living in slums? What do we do about it? So we started this journey around 4 to 5 years back, and we recently published a book called Six Metros. It's co-authored by me, Urmi, and Suresh Patel. And yeah, you can't escape numbers with him. So it's quite heavy on data, but that was one of the reasons also that data is not easily available. So the book has 2 volumes. One is called Mappings, which is more like a reference. And if you really want to dig deep into each city, there are 6 metropolises across the globe. All of them are democratic cities. The reason why we selected these was because in democracies, the policy formulation would be something similar to how we function in our democracy in India. And through that, the idea was to see, because these are all developed cities and we are developing. So what they did right, what they did wrong, which made life easy for them. Is it possible to learn anything, or is it possible just to trigger our thoughts better in a different direction? And through that, we have given recommendations for city extension areas in cities like larger metropolises are all getting extended. So how planning can happen there, how urban design can happen there. And also new towns are emerging. By 2050, India will be more urban than rural. So how are we looking into these towns if we do not value our own indigenous way of living? So in the book, those recommendations are there. So through our research and publication, we try and do advocacy. And the idea is not to limit to publication because very few people kind of actually read. The book itself is like a reference book with 2 volumes. And we are engaging with an institution, Mumbai Port Trust, who have been open-minded to be knowledge partners to kind of understand a different development model and see whether anything of merit they would like to include, because the eastern waterfront is yet to develop. So we are taking the recommendations from the book and showing its application with the institution there. So this is the stage in which the our recommendations go. So the idea is to just to sensitize thinking so that in the long run, amendments and policies come more naturally to them rather than we kind of fighting for it. Because I think fighting will happen. You know, we have also created lots of groups where we keep telling this shit needs to be done. And sometimes ranting does not solve. So we thought that let's try a different direction if it works. So like this, we have done a couple of projects. So I'm not going to talk about more projects. The restriction was for 2. So, but you can log on to the website or the social media and just see what we are generally, talking about or writing about. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm Pranav. I have a degree from the IES College of Architecture, bachelor's degree, and then I studied at Taliesin, the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture in the US. Um, I used to live in the desert over there, and I built my own shelter so I could live. And I'm not going to show any of that, but that's a little bit of like background to what we do. We about 40% of our work is public projects. So everything on the left, public projects, and we do a lot of other things, stores, restaurants, homes, all kinds of other stuff, furniture, and so that makes up 60%. 40% of the projects are the most interesting ones. They are the ones that bring us most joy, least money, and most time. So we've got that. Uh, I I like some, like Mumbai is such a tight city, and there's so much that we like about it. There's so much that we hate about it. It's a polarizing place. It's difficult. It's easy. It's all everything is all at the same time, and these images are all public spaces. These are almost all of them taken while I've been cycling. So I also cycle all across the city because I don't I don't think a car is a good way to travel. So I use the train or I cycle. Today I've used a car. Uh, it was yeah, yeah, yeah. We were carpooling today. But so for for whatever it is, we've got 1.5 crore people working to work every day, and everybody else, every single person, whether they're going by car, train, bus, however, is a pedestrian. So what is the problem? Why do we have footpaths like that? Um, this is something that we recognized early on in our practice. This was in the early, this is behind the BDD Chawls, and there's Shabad flooring over there, which is from the early 20th century. And then we have, paver blocks, which are completely disintegrated. So we were always thinking about what we can do. Now I live at Worli, and our studio is here at Lower Parel. The distance between the two is about maybe a kilometer and a half, as the bird flies and as a crow flies. And this is, you would say that some a distance that you could walk very easily in about 10 minutes. You can walk, or 20 minutes. You can walk that distance. And same from Lower Parel. So this is sort of a sphere of influence or a radius of influence that I have close to me, and something that I experience on a day-to-day basis. This is the trip that I used to take in 2013, 2014. I used to walk this distance. Now I cycle the same distance. And then mapped over that are all the public projects that we've done in between 2013 to 2019. So it's all in that same sphere, the same radius. There's one more project I'm going to show you, which is still in the same radius, and it is a public project. It's in the KEM hospital. So all of these projects have actually come about, and you can see the most number of them are on my walking trip. So, like Samir said, that like I'm walking and I'm observing things and I'm saying that, hey, like, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? So let's fix it. Let's fix it, and let's fix it at every time. So the way I see it, that it's actually a selfish pursuit. So I'm seeing myself as a pretty selfish person, that I want the road that I'm walking on to be nice, but I also want it to be nice for everybody else. So it's the selfish pursuit of a higher quality of life for all. That's the way I see it, and that's how we've been functioning with our public projects. So now, 10 years ago, we did this footpath at Prabhadevi. It looked like a standard footpath, not too bad actually, compared to what we see now. But we converted it into this, where you could walk in the shade and you had a better surface, the Shabad stone returned, more green, more space to sit, all of that. Immediately after that, the Mumbai Mirror covered us with this, like, look, BMC, here's a footpath you should replicate across Mumbai. And I think they found that quite embarrassing. So they built this all over A Ward. They didn't ask us, they just put in these paver blocks, which were square, which were the same shape, and did this. And obviously, that does not work very well. Um, so I'm going to show you all a series of like flowcharts of how that works. So the way we function is that we have a footpath, we have an interested party who is interested in improving it publicly, having some publicity and using their CSR money for this. So they come to us and say, oh, hey, hi, can you build this for us? So we say, okay, we'll give it to the BMC and say, you'll get some free publicity, and you can say that, oh, I want to, I'll cut the ribbon. So, and then you get a good footpath after that. In between all of that, you have politicians, local mafia, all kinds of other useless people who will, who will come in the way and do whatever they like to do. So at that point, after we finished this first footpath, we had gone to the BMC, and like Rohit, we've met all the BMC commissioners from 2013 till today, and not gotten anywhere with it, because we've got 4,000 kilometers of footpath. That's the cost. So it costs about 6,000 crore to fix. It's 1% of BMC's budget this year. So if we do it at, this was more than 10 years ago, so we could have had good footpaths all across the city by now. But we don't, because they don't want it to happen. So this is the second project I'm going to show you. This is Tulsi Pipe Road. And this was 6 years ago. This is spaces under the bridge at Lower Parel. A small diagram of what it looked like: office buildings everywhere, and illegal parking with one U-turn in the middle over there. A lot of cars just sitting there, toilets, not toilets exactly, like this under the bridge being used as a toilet, and really tight spaces over there where the two arrows are, because the U-turns were really tight. And it was actually common sense that you don't have this sort of U-turn over there. This was the two green arrows are the only places where you could cross the road. So this was a whole big mess, this junction at the end of it. So he said, hey, move that U-turn so that you have some more space for the signal ahead, and add some more crossings. No, why only those two crossings on one side? So they agreed, and we got these two crossings here. We reduced that size in the front so that you can have some more cars waiting at the signal. And then we tapered that off. We made a turn over there. And we created, in the purple, we created a public toilet there, so that they don't have to use the columns of the bridge to piss on. So after that, ahead there was a shared taxi stand near Kamla Mills. So we brought that in here and made taxi bays for them. Overall, we added a lot of footpath space, because you can now cross over at any place and then walk across this. You can sit inside that and come. So this is the difference between the old plan and what we have. This is what it looks like now. So you have, you had cars earlier, and people were just walking in between, because this was the only shaded space that you had. Now to get this, okay, sorry, we cleaned it up. Here's the taxi bays, before and after again. Uh, a lot of benches to sit on. These benches, this is at 2 o'clock at night. Someone wants to come and play music. It's open 24 hours, unlike the BMC parks, which are closed most of the time. Um, these benches also have stormwater drains under them, which allow water to go into the ground. Uh, they're heavily used throughout the day and the night. They're used by all kinds of people. Everyone comes here. There are 5 sports being played in this one photo. So we really enjoyed this thing. There's musical events that have happened. Here's the taxi bay being inaugurated. It took 1 year for the RTO to get convinced that the taxi bay should go here, but it like 1 year after it was built. But the taximen union was very happy. Look at how easily they can use, how passengers can get into the taxi compared to how they get off at the other station. Um, so we actually went to the BMC again, saying that like, let's replicate this. The BMC ignored us. The traffic police did come and see it. The BMC called us after a few days to their office and showed us our own photographs and said that, oh, can you do this? So we're like, we did this. But anyway. So this project had an urban zone. We were the interested party. At some point, it was us, the chairman of HDFC, Mr. Mangal Prabhat Lodha, whoever was willing to give money, and us going to whoever else had money, asking for money, saying that, can you give us 5 crore to build this? Can you give us 5 crore to build this? Someone even told us that I've planted 20 trees and they're worth 5 crore now. That is what we are dealing with. And the urban zone then went to the MCGM. Now it's called the BMC. We still had our people who were didn't want us to do it. But we had now learned a lesson. We learned how to get rid of these people. We learned how to kind of insulate ourselves. But I'm saying that, why do we need to do it this way? Why doesn't the BMC remove us from this equation, remove the interested party who wants to spend their CSR money, but include the local residents and the politicians, because they're important, and then call us as required? I don't want to do either of those first two things. What I want is the city to do the third one, where all of us are just support system for the BMC. We are not the people who are driving these projects, where in the first two slides we're the people driving the project. This is again at 2 o'clock at night. We designed a bar across the road, so that's why we were there at 2 o'clock at night. The next project I'm going to show you is the Ladies' Common Room in the KEM Hospital. This is a project that we did with Studio Mumbai. And the KEM Hospital is a beautiful building. It's just incredibly beautiful. There's so much good design throughout that building that you cannot imagine how comfortable it is. It's just so nice. But for some reason, the ladies' common room looked like this. It was just awful. There was not enough light. It just wasn't a great space. So we did this. We spruced it up. We used the same details that are across the place, and we added some more space inside the room itself, so that the girls can go up and take a nap in the afternoon. They're medical students. They're tired all the time. You can see them sleeping on the left over there and right and like everywhere. So this is what the room looks like now. And I'm just showing you like all photos that are before and after. There were these beautiful staircases throughout the campus that we replicated and made into the one on the left. There's beautiful hardware that again we replicated. We've not actually created anything of our own over here. Everything was replicas of whatever you see in KEM Hospital. There was this room, which was a big dump. which we improved. We got water for the girls. We got space to change, do makeup, all of that. There was a washing room like that, which we converted into a toilet. There was curved tiles in the morgue that the hospital removed. We brought them back. We put curved tiles in the bathrooms everywhere, so that they don't become dirty like this. They stay clean. They're easier to clean. So yeah, and now a lot more girls can use it. A lot more people use it now. We also we have in all our projects we always have a lot of fun. So this is us scientifically testing our the mezzanine that we had built. Yeah, and yeah, then also like aligning the staircase. How do you do it? Put it like this. Put it like that. This is, you know. So the idea basically is that, you know, we're all in this together, and as practitioners, as students, as everybody, I think we should all work towards a common goal of improving our public spaces, of improving the commons that we have, because at least right now, from where I see it, we have each other. The BMC doesn't have our back. So we've got to see how to negotiate and navigate these territories.
I think we'll just thanks. So we'll just move on quickly because there's 3 more people left, and this is a long introduction. But I think we'll bring in some of the common threads after this.
Hello. Hello. I'm Mayuri, and Kalpit and me, we graduated in 2006 and formed a practice called Made in Mumbai. Um, I think around 18 years back, we'd be in the same position as you all, you know, just kind of doing all the studio work and kind of interested in public buildings, public spaces. And when you move out of the college and you're just new out in the city and you want to kind of, you know, shape the everyday, work in the everyday realm, but how do you really do it? You know, no one comes to you and say, okay, there's a public project, do the public project. So, so what are the kind of processes you follow? What are the methods you follow to kind of begin to intervene? So this is how this is one drawing from our one of our project in Hyderabad, and this is the way the city surrounds the building, and you know you're interested in how the building can kind of become the part of the city, become the part of the context in a way. So so I think we want to talk about what is the method we followed. Next. Okay. So this is a drawing from one of the project, one of the competition we did, street design, and the context is kind of made of variety of people, you know, who are staying, who are working, who are storing things, people who are passing by. So the domain is made up of multiple set of stakeholders who kind of occupy the domain currently. Um, other than the people who live, work, play, there are also the domain of bureaucracy, which kind of moves around. So even if you're moving let's say a light pole, you go to the kind of BEST. If you're kind of looking at the tree, then you go to the garden and trees department. You know, there's a traffic department who's kind of interested in, you know, regulating how the traffic moves. So there's various kind of stakeholders which are working with, other than the and on the ground, there are commuters, there are hawkers, there are vendors, there are people who are visiting the market. There are lots of goats on the street. There are a lot of goats tied on the street because they belong to the shop owners, and they're fed, you know, leaves every day. And on a Sunday, it becomes like a entire pavement becomes a bathing ground for all the goats. You know, so there are a lot of multiple kind of stakeholders on ground. And if you look at this, you know, the in-between city, which we see between comforts of our homes and large infrastructural projects. This is in-between kind of liminal city. And if you wonder why is it like this, and if you look at the kind of the method through which the city gets made is any projects, and let's say if you look at public toilets, or you look at these smaller in villages, you look at these Anganwadi or any kind of smaller projects, the method of making is first you have a typical drawing, then the BOQ gets made, then the tender is invited, and then it goes to a contractor. And the role of, let's say, an architect, urban designer, or an urban planner, there's no role for any of us actually. So then how do you kind of make space for us? So generally the form which gets generated in what we experience in our everyday, it comes out of this process. So the form of the city in some sense is following the BOQ and the contractor in some sense. What ideal method through which we wanted to intervene is that when you, let's say, there is a project, you bring an architect or an urban designer or an urban planner. They study the context, they study the site, they look at the stakeholders who are kind of part of the landscape. They identify kind of like it's the way we do our projects in college. You know, you identify stakeholders, you identify what program can kind of go into there. You figure out a kind of appropriate typology. Then you prepare a BOQ, then goes the tender, and then comes the contractor. So that's the method through which we wanted to work. And then we wanted to kind of work with what role architecture and design can play in shaping this everyday environment. So so actually, if you study what the state is building currently, there are a lot of multiple chota programs which gets built, which not architects and urban designers are kind of proposed for larger like are kind of involved in the larger projects, but chota project is a public toilet or a seating or a bench or a crossing. There is no and that's why we see, you know, when you're walking by, you have a crossing and it'll hit a pole, or it'll be barricaded, or there'll be a statue there or something. So because there's no one actually looking at the ground and saying that, okay, there's a crossing here, so people need to cross actually, you know. So there has to be clearing. And so yes, you need someone to kind of look at the very chota conditions very carefully. So so now what shall we do? You know, we want to kind of enter this landscape. What do we do? So there are a few methods we followed. One was the making of books and publications, where you're looking at a certain smaller programs of the city and making a manifesto of how do you really go about designing them. So, along with the publication, there was this idea of a exhibition, that how do you reach out? Your client is the government, the politician, the bureaucracy, the everyday public. How do you really reach out to them and kind of explain what your role is? So what we started with is a traveling exhibition where so this was in 2017. What we designed a manifesto which was called as the Toilet Manifesto. It was funny because toilet was something as small and mundane and, you know, like program and dirty program, and there was a kind of large kind of manifesto kind of dedicated to it. So it started as 10 kind of typologies for the city, and it's grown to now more than I think more than 75 typologies. So so we have so let's say we started with chota condition. What if it's a pavement site? What if it's connected to a garden? Or what if it's an island in the city? So what if it is located within an informal community? So what should be the type like? And as we travel to different cities, different states, we were commissioned for different sites. From 10 typologies, it grew, it kept changing. And so let's say there'll be a different site, then it'll be another typologies. And one typology might tweak and become another kind of type in a way. And but over a period of time, we realized that implementation was a major issue, because it will go into a tender process. Tender process may say sometime the kind of contractors you will get because the budget of a toilet project is very low. So the kind of contractors you get are very kind of the last category of contractors you get. And then you're going to completely compromise on the fundamental. I'm not saying so much on aesthetic, but I'm saying the fundamental architect. There's a toilet, so there has to be a ventilation and a light coming through. But with a contractor who doesn't understand this, it becomes really, because aesthetic it's okay. Chalo lal ke bale peela color maar diya chalega. But it should be basically light ventilation to chahiye ho. So So then we've recently, it's been few years, we formed this foundation called the Urban Loop, which does, I would say, which looks at the idea of sanitation at a larger scale, which studies different kind of public spaces, city landscape, and identifies what are the kind of critical spot where the public sanitation facility is needed, what scale is needed, what program is needed, how do you do, let's say, hybrid programming depending on the particular condition. Then we propose a typology, we we also build it and we also maintain it. So there is there are other stakeholders within us who also build it and maintain it over time. And some of the stakeholders also ready to fund it now. So so from just a design agency, it has grown to kind of construction, build, and even fund. So exhibition has been an important process. I think first one just took place on the lower floor of this building. That I was still young, we didn't have many build projects, but a lot of drawings, like drawings through which we were communicating our ideas, through which we were communicating our vision and our interests. So I think that started in 2016. 2017 was the toilet manifesto that we did at Nehru Science Center, where it was fundamentally looking at what toilets can do for the city. And the last one is liberating the mundane, which looked at so from the toilet manifesto, I think when we traveled to the to different states and the cities, the municipal corporation began splitting us in different directions. So there was an Anganwadi. From toilet it branched down to, let's do an Anganwadi, or let's do a public garden, or let's do a bus stop or something. So that's where the kind of from the toilet it branched out to different kind of directions. So these are all the kind of traveling exhibitions we've done in different parts of the country. This was at the Jawahar Kala Kendra. That's where actually it opened up, and yeah. So now from the 10 models grown to multiple models now. I think politicians, bureaucrats, municipal corporators, like all different kinds of bodies, it's important kind of reached out to them, and because sometimes you realize that they are also looking for something. It's not that they don't understand design. They understand, they're looking somewhere they're not able to reach the right kind of an agency. So I think models, exhibitions have been a right method to kind of communicate. And what was nice at the end of the process is we realized that we're sitting with the let's say engineers from municipal corporation, and they would say, this is a circular type, and we have a land in middle of the 3 intersections of a road, and and there is a traffic chowki also which is need to be planned. Why don't we use the circular type, because it will work nice as a traffic chowki, it will work nice as a toilet on a lower level, traffic chowki on an upper level. So I think they would be able to connect to us and understand that what a type is in a way. I think we've traveled to 25 cities, almost 8 states in the last 6 years. We also traveled to Tallinn Architecture Biennale, and we also went to London Design Biennale. And from, I think what I was talking about, it branched out to a different kind of function. This is Hyderabad Crematorium, where they are actually, burial grounds, Hindu burial grounds, and Hindu, Muslim, Christian burial ground, all of them together sometimes. And now they're transforming into, crematorium, because there's no space to bury. So then, there are sites with a lot of graves and the residual kind of land for cremation programs. So you just need tinier function they're not large land available. So there are these tinier follies. Citizen Facilitation Center in Kolhapur, flood shelter in Kolhapur. And these are all branched out of the toilet project. So it began with the toilet but went to another program. This is a visitors plaza near Charminar, just opposite Charminar. Lake Edge, these are kind of part of pilgrimage infrastructure projects. This is a lake, planning of the Lake Edge. This is a very beautiful small shrine in Kutch, in a very dry landscape of Kutch, and it's like a small temple around which there are programs for the community. There's a large tree in the center. This is part of the street. This was a street design project. It's looking at the Grant Road and looking at all the kind of. This is a very important project. Where it's looking at chota conditions on the entire road and responding to each condition. This is a Purana Pul project, which is in Hyderabad. It's an old historical bridge. Now it is not fit for vehicular movement, so it's converted into a market and a public space. So it was replanning of the entire bridge. This was, I think we were commissioned for, in Hyderabad, we were commissioned for around 53 sites for different facilities. These are some students from your college, and this is when we are commissioned for 53 sites. This is the kind of the production of the drawings look like, like each set has almost more than like 250 drawings, and there are 53 sets of it. So this is actually the kind of the dynamics of everyday life at Made. Riddhi said that. And the projects come like waves. So first, that's a Rajasthan project when there were 70 sites committed to us, and suddenly it's just like we are there in Rajasthan for 2 months, just traveling from one town to the other to town, identifying sites. And they actually they wanted us to do entire Rajasthan, all villages, all cities, and they said we wanted in 2 months because elections are there, and we are like, even if we go from one village to the other, it will take 2 to 3. So then we said, okay, we will do where we can fly, so we can easily reach there, and so we said, okay, we'll kind of shortlist to 70 sites and in main cities. So then we also thought of what if we buy a caravan and just like we put our team on the caravan and we'll keep traveling, keep deciding. And I'm like, no, it doesn't happen like that. We'll not reach only entire Rajasthan. And I was like, oh, we'll do it. We'll project in villages. And Kalpit's like, no, we will not reach all the villages. So it's like a long phase. These are the smaller kind of typologies we kind of develop over time. And these are some of the build projects. This is in Rambagh Circle. It's a bus stop, public toilet, and a small kind of baby feeding room for children, for women and children. And I think now what is nice is since it kind of has this open amphitheater kind of space, it's open to everyone. So now anything they want to hold, like some morcha or some protest, or they want to meet for morning walks, or there is Rambagh Palace across. So all the staff who comes out here to eat dabba or something, so it's a nice space. You overlook the entire kind of roads and traffic moving by. You're looking at everything. It's a nice quiet space. People come here to fill their water bottles. They get out of the bus, sit here for some time, move. So it's nice space to actually be in the street, because there are not many spaces where you can actually be out in the city. This is a part of Govardhan Park where it's a tiny eatery and a public toilet. Earlier, no one wanted to build public toilets next to their sites, but now it's become a pre-wedding shoot destination. So people come and take the pre-wedding shoot photos. Also, a lot of kids come and earlier they used to do TikTok, and now they do the reels and everything in front of. This is that circular toilet which I was talking about. It's in Jaipur, near Commissionerate. On lower level is a toilet, above is a traffic chowki. And it's on the kind of intersection of 3 roads. It's opposite the police commissionerate. It's a very nice building across. These are the kind of spaces. This is in the Ram Nivas garden. It becomes a space for performance in the evening. This is the drawing you saw in the beginning. It's the Hyderabad Urban Do project. It's outside the Sikandrabad railway station. It's in the middle of mad kind of movements. The people exiting from the station, bus stops are there. Next to that, there are these bus stops built, which are AC bus stops. So they were closed bus stop with the doors. So no one goes and waits inside because everyone's outside. Although it's AC, everyone's outside, and they're all closed and dirty, and people are spitting on it, and they're all closed. So weird. So this is the project. The idea is very simple, that there were Sikandrabad had a lot of clock towers. So kind of you go to the memory of the clock tower, and of course you need good light and ventilation within the spaces. The kind of the local stone which is used, slate stone is used to kind of give you a good light and ventilation. That actually toilet now fundamentally that is what you need. You need good sunlight, you need good ventilation and air. So it's not, even if let's say someone is not cleaning, this will make sure it doesn't stink. The AC toilet doesn't work. So yeah. So that's what we are trying to do. And chota gesture, there's a kind of tree, so you make a seating, people can sit there on the other. So it's simple, it integrates well into the city. This is the inside. It's a nice airy space. Skylights are there. Also, the idea that you can't use a lot of light because you want to run low on the kind of bills and everything. So good skylights and everything is this. In the daytime, it runs without using a lot of light. This I think I'll skip because it's long things. I'll just skip it. It's actually the process of what we actually learned from the thing. I'll skip this. Yeah, like it takes fake. Yeah, I'll long kind of. This is the kind of bureaucracy which you actually kind of. So your phone is filled with like Srinivas Shetty, which are like some 20 Srinivas Shetty calling, and you don't know which Srinivas Shetty is calling from which zone. So you say, Khairatabad, Srinivas Shetty, number this, link with this site. So your phone is like a mess. If someone calls and you're like, whom you're talking to? And funny is when you get suddenly, I remember Rupali and Prasad, they called us that, that Vasundhara Raje was there and she wants you all to, come to Rajasthan. And that day, I don't know from how, a phone was filled with 100 phone calls within, let's say, half an hour. And you don't know whom you talk. And language sometimes becomes a barrier because Hyderabad language is like you don't understand much. So I think somewhere drawings and everything works much better. Of course, and the teaching has been an important part. I think since we out from college we've taught, so there's somehow no distinguish the differentiation between teaching and practice. It's one for us. This is a part of some of the projects, academic work we've done. Yeah, so this is the inquiry. This is what the process is: academia, competition, manifestos, exhibition, and publication. These are the kind of methods. That's.
I mean, in some ways, I think we've seen a very interesting sort of circle over here where advocacy is something that, all of them are engaging with, where Jasmine is talking about policy and really kind of looking at other examples. How do you draw them in? How do you look at, making sense of numbers and standards? And then Pranav was really kind of looking at a circle of influence areas around, and then what needs to be done, and then sort of trying to look at what are the mechanics of entering those, and making small changes, but which in some ways are also not based on standards alone, but also experiential ways of dealing with cities. And then there was Mayuri and Kalpat's practice that really also looked at advocacy and how do you enter this? How do you enter this kind of space, from academia, but then also going into starting to make exhibitions and putting things out there, for you to be heard. Like, so what is it? How do you get heard then? And I remember this, we had their projects exhibited at Venice Space at JKK, and Vasundhara Raje came and said, I want this toilet in Jaipur. And then also there was the Mancini's crematorium project, which was there and said, I want this also in Jaipur. So, in some ways, how do you, I think this is for everyone, for students as well, how do you kind of create those spaces of advocacy, whether it is going and speaking to commissioners or sort of looking at policy and other best practices, or, doing exhibitions. So I think that is really kind of important. What is the level of engagement that one does, and what is the mode of that engagement? I think that is something that is coming across. And we have two more practices that have also dealt with this kind of engagement of advocacy and practice in different contexts, one in urban villages, I think, and the other one also kind of looking at the public realm in very interesting ways. So let's move on. I think we've had a really long conversation. These were actually 3 questions that we had that are now all clubbed into one, which is interesting because in some ways that's the kind of biography that is being drawn here. So
Thank you, Rupali. I promise I won't take more than 5 minutes. So to begin with, my name is Kirti and I'm an architect and urban designer. And myself with my partner Jay, we started with Bombay 61 Studio in 2013. So largely our practice is looking at public participation, which is very community-based practice that is mostly rooted in Versova, Kolivada, which is where we are working with the community of the fisher folk, that is the Kolis. And our practice is basically asking the question of how there can be a bottom-up approach to bring about transformation within a community. And to talk about bottom-up approach, we have been implementing participatory approach and participatory research methods, which are very hands-on with the community. And to contextualize our practice, what we do is we work with the community to generate projects. So our way of approaching projects is very different. We do not have a project-based approach where we decide a project and then we move. But we conduct a series of workshops, a series of mapping exercises, research exercises with the community. And it is through their concerns or their issues is where our inquiry of the practice begins, or where we set our project. So this particular project that you're looking at is one such project that we did with the Kohlis, where we were talking about their environmental concerns in terms of the condition of the creek and the pollution that is happening in the creeks. So that the project began with the ideation workshop with the community, where the community brought out the issues what they are facing in terms of, so the idea of the commons is very different for each one of us, even sitting here, if you observe. So here, when we talk about a particular community, their idea of commons begins with their relationship with the commons in terms of livelihood, their culture, or their life entirely is based on these commons. So, so this particular project was in the ideation workshop was focusing on understanding what are the challenges and the issues that the community is facing, and what are the solutions which the community thinks are ideal to tackle these solutions. And one of these projects is the net filter installation project, which comes from a local knowledge or traditional knowledge based systems, which was devised along with the community through co-production or co-creation was the method that was used. So you'll see that none of our projects are really coming from approaching the authorities or going through the bureaucracy of it, but we work directly with the community to devise these projects. And the how we do it is that, you know, our the practice is embedded within the community. So our studio or office is located right in the middle of the Kolivada, so that becomes a space where the community comes together, where the conflicts happen and the negotiations happen, because there are a lot of conflicts that are there existing within the community as well. So our role becomes more like a mediator, where the community comes together, and most of the negotiations happen there to arrive at certain decisions which are concerning with the commons. So the process starts with ideation, then implementation, and then we move on to dissemination, which is in the form of exhibitions and dialogues that happens within the community and beyond. And that is the kind of practice that we have been having. So this is an array of projects that we've been working on within the Kolivada. So our practice is also based on different scales. So it is also the urban scale and the place making that happens within the neighborhood, and also looking at certain architectural practices, which we again do with the community, which forms the economics of our practice. And so it is based on the ideology that, you know, how there is a doctor or a clinic for every neighborhood or every community. We feel that there has to be an architectural practice or urban design practice which is specific to a community. And so the work is endless, and it goes on at multiple scales and with multiple concerns. So it is never like, you know, we did one project and then we are done with Warsaw, and that's not how we work. So it is a practice where it's embedded within the community, and the work is endless, it's limitless, it goes on. Yeah, thank you.
Urmi.
is Urmi Kenya here. It's working. So I think the most daunting part for me this evening was when Rupali said we have to talk about ourselves a bit, a longer introduction rather than a shorter bio, because the years quickly add up and the mathematics is quite scary. I studied architecture at Academy of Architecture and then did a master's in urban design and spatial planning in the UK. And I worked there for a long time in the corporate world, completely opposite to what I'm doing at the moment. Um, I worked with a real estate company which was just stepping into urban design and public realm. And for me, that was quite a steep learning curve. I was part of a team that was trying to shape up the urban design department there. And it was fun most of the time, but it's really difficult when you're working with developers because they really don't care. Developers are the same everywhere in the world. They only want to know about the money and they don't really care about the aesthetics and whatever else might go, functionality. I've been back in Mumbai for a decade now, um, and largely continue to work in the urban and public realm. What I'm doing now is definitely far more interesting than what I did in the UK. It's diametrically opposite in many ways, like where you're talking about really detailed micro design of a bollard in the UK. Over here, you're like trying to get your footpaths back. So it's it's a much steeper learning curve actually. Um, I think the most interesting and challenging part of what we are doing. So I just wanted to add that I continue to have my kind of personal, professional practice, but today I'm representing Urban Center Mumbai and what we're doing there as an organization. Um, in many senses, the most challenging and interesting part of what we do is actually trying to advocate our initiatives through the governmental frameworks. Mr. Shinkre was very optimistic in saying 5 years. There are certain projects we've been working on for the last, I don't know, I've been working on it for 10 years and my colleagues for even longer than that. So, and they're still going on. I think that's it. Yeah, so but not losing the faith. Like we've gone back with the same idea hundreds of times to different BMC engineers, to higher up BMC officers, bureaucrats. And every time there's a transfer, you start from scratch again because you then need to sell your initiative again. So it's challenging, but it's become part of our routine now. I just thought I'll just very briefly go through what we are trying to do at Urban Center Mumbai. I'd like to point out earlier on that we don't see ourselves as a conventional practice. It's more a space between practice and trying, it's more of an institutional space that we are working within. We set up Urban Center Trust in 2020, just post the pandemic, and it's set up as a not-for-profit public charitable trust. Our main motive was to look at various scales in the urban realm. So we look at policies, we look at urban frameworks, we look at urban design interventions. Most of them are process-based, community-based, and not really project-based. And also the idea was to work across cities rather than, kind of keeping ourselves just to Mumbai. Of course, we know Mumbai best. So the idea was that under Urban Center Trust, we may end up having a number of urban centers across the country in different regions, different districts as the need arises. Again, this would be a not-for-profit space, also a non-discriminatory space because with uh, we work with public government agencies, we work a lot with communities, and we've often had some kind of individuals who come in from a completely private setup. But the idea is that we're not a client-based or a project-based organization. We're trying to get into the process of urban planning, urban design. Um, Urban Center Mumbai is the first center that we set up. It's based in Hindu Colony, Dadar. The idea was to set this up as a collective space where we can have various stakeholders involved in the process, be it at a urban planning, spatial planning level, or at an urban design and intervention level. We're largely the geographical area that we're looking at is Mumbai metropolitan region. There's just a brief kind of overview of the area that we're looking at. I've got 2 or 3 initial, like just a few slides on different scales that we are working at, but I'll end with one of our recently completed projects, hopefully on a more positive note. This was the regional plan, which was, the draft was published in 2016, and then the final plan was published in around sometime in 2019, but it was quite convoluted because for a long time it was nowhere to be seen. One of our main kind of, when you look at this plan, it's really green. You see all the urbanizable areas. You see the, sorry, I'll just put this. And the purples represent the industrial areas. It's really interesting when you look at it. We then studied all the land uses and what's allowed under each zone. So what you see as largely green, if you study it in detail, the green zones, out of the 31 permitted uses, there are 28 uses allowed in the green zone 1, which is even more than the urbanizable zone, and 14 in green zone 2. So actually, when you then analyze it further, this is what the region will look like. So even though the regional plan suggests it's going to be highly sustainable and green and they're going to contain the sprawl, it's not really the case. Through the working on regional plan, we've also been working with some of the indigenous communities. We've largely been working with the Koliwadas and Gautans across Maharashtra. And some of their main concerns at the moment, other than livelihood or community empowerment, the first thing that's happening is that they're losing their identity in the city, because a lot of them, because of the way the settlement has fared over the decades, in terms of infrastructure, sanitation, both sanitation and trunk infrastructure, deteriorated living conditions, poor building stock, they are being typecasted as slums, which means that they come under the threat of eviction and SRA. And actually, these are communities that are really still very deeply involved in their livelihoods, in their settlements, and also in terms of being integral part of Mumbai and Maharashtra. We've had several meetings with them over the last 7 or 8 years, and largely what they need to get into is at a community level, is the environmental rights, because at the moment, even the CRZ regulations is not actually has not identified their settlements and the different fishing allied activities that they need to carry out. That's a big threat. The other one is the land and development rights, because their presence in the city is held at abeyance, because the DP has not actually, neither have they identified the extent of these kolivadas, but they've also not looked at any kind of DCRs which will help upgrade the settlements. And then finally, because a lot is in limbo, their quality of life is highly deteriorated because they're not able to get any of the trunk infrastructure. So these are just, this is just an idea of the different levels of government that we would work with. But our idea for this project is to actually work largely with the communities, handhold them and build capacity. So we're trying to get them to approach these different governmental bodies. The other project that we're looking at is at Urban Center is 2 million homes in Mumbai. As we know, I mean, we're seeing slums around us all the time, and the numbers are daunting, and the number of people living in these slums is daunting. The total requirement is approximately 2.1 million homes, which was about 4 or 5 years ago. The rate at which the houses are being built is shocking, and the estimated time looking at these figures is about 300 years. Of course, in this time you'll have a further requirement of the affordable homes. So it's really not going as the government has planned. So we've been trying to work with different kind of agencies that are involved in the housing policies and frameworks within Mumbai. Again, it is just looking at releasing some of the locked up lands, looking at how mass rapid public transport might make faraway lands easier to access. And then finally, there's a lot of housing stock, land within the government which can be developed for housing stock. So this is just these first few projects are more at an urban policy framework scale. But I just wanted to show these as well because eventually we're working at a different scale, but we're still looking at the spaces for people. We're still looking at the urban realm. I'm going to just go in a little bit more detail in through some of our urban design intervention and process-based projects or sites. So we started with some pilot projects where our main aim was to improve walkability across the city, improve the pedestrian experience. Currently, we see that at every 50 to 100 meters, the paving material is changing. There are several types of tree surrounds. There are several features like railings, bollards, etc., which really hinder movement. I won't get into any form of life on the footpaths because that's a completely different discussion. So we did some pilot projects after working with BMC bureaucrats for a number of years, rather working on them in terms of getting some momentum for these projects. And then between 2021 and around now, we've done these 4 demonstration streets across Mumbai. There's one in Dadar, near from Ruya College to Wadala Station. There's one in Chembur, Bandra East, and Goregaon West. We're also looking at a number of nodes and streets in the fort area. Some are in the stages of completion, some have just started, and some are still lying with the BMC decision making. So what our main kind of interventions for these projects was just looking at some standardized principles and standardized elements, which eventually we hope the BMC will take on. These were just really to demonstrate that how we can make our footpaths more walkable and reduce the, I mean, we've looked at a design life of 30 to 50 years for these footpaths. So we are hoping that over time, the number of times our footpaths get dug up because of poor surfacing or for utilities reduces drastically. So this is just outside VJTI College for all of y'all who are familiar with it. As usual, there were the paver blocks which lose their shape, size, level, everything once it's been dug up. And it's really poor quality for walking. What we've tried to do is bring in some basic features using M40 concrete, and we're looking largely at making our footpaths universally accessible. Most of us, like my mom, never walks on the footpath because of the varying levels across it. She finds it easier to walk on the road, which is, of course, Mumbai roads are not worth walking on because you don't know when you'll get hit. So we just try to bring in as much of the walkability and universal accessibility, largely. So all ages, all types of people can use the same. Where we found, so luckily in the Parsi colony area and some of the fort footpaths, we still have the old basalt stone, which was used for decades before I think concrete blocks came in, the paver blocks. So in such a case, we've removed the old stone and dressed it and reset it using better jointing and better dressing. A lot of these old stones are currently without any grain of texture on it, which makes them slippery. So we've introduced that and kept them in situ. We've also looked at median crossing, median islands, which is used world over. So here so we've had some wins, we've not managed to finish all the 4 demonstration projects in the way we had envisaged, because invariably there is some kind of, so sometimes just from the shopkeepers we get a lot of, they don't want anything done outside their shops because that means that there's a temporary reduction in footfall. Some places the community was deeply involved and that has prolonged the project. In some cases, it might be that someone's managed to get through to the local corporator and they don't want a certain part of the project to go ahead. Um, However, I think we've managed to finish majority, like maybe 75 to 80% of the stretches. I've just put up some photos. So our idea was to actually have barrier-free footpaths till the extent we can, and just make it more pleasing to the eye as well, aesthetically, rather than having bollards and railings everywhere. But what has happened in many of our stretches, so this is the Dadar Parsi colony, the residents were really concerned about trees, even though time and again we told them we weren't going to do anything with the trees, we're actually improving the surrounds. Eventually, they brought the MHCC in, the local corporator in, intervened, and they managed to get much larger surrounds, which means that the walking space reduces drastically. But at the same time, in the same area, they are okay with private vehicles being parked on the footpath. So we don't understand the logic of this. I think it's because it's the kind of communities which are so used to just getting into their car and heading out. They don't actually understand the value of footpaths. So unfortunately, we had to bring the bollards back in, but we've tried to keep them at a lower level so at least visually they don't create a barrier. This is outside the DG headquarters in Fort area. So again, there was a lot of lovely old basalt stone, which we've removed and dressed and reset in the same location. In the middle of all of that, there was also a request from an organization called Access for Hope, which work area adding in the guiding tiles, which is the kind of yellow strip that you see across, which helps the visually impaired people. I guess one of the wins was, so this is a street in Chembur where, I don't know how to turn this volume off, where the Access for Hope collaborated with the BMC and carried out an audit of one of the streets that we worked on. And their main kind of comment was that the guiding tiles were missing, which is what we've now started using. So that was quite I think that was a big win from this project, that at least there is some appreciation of what the footpaths need to be like. I'll just go ahead. We are also doing some work with tourist districts and market streets, where again you have the similar issues where private shops have managed to really encroach onto the streets, and actually finally what you get is just a collage of different products, but not really focus on anything. So we're currently working on the street with the shopkeepers, with the local government, and with some local political figures there, in trying to improve the width of the street. So as you see this open drain, actually that still exists on site. But most of the shops have actually gone over the drain. So, and majority of the shops have come out by at least 10 feet from the original building line. So we're just looking at what can be achieved as a midway. Okay. So this is a recently completed project. I thought we're always talking about the bureaucratic processes within BMC, but actually we found that BMC was quite instrumental in seeing this project to completion in the way we envisaged, and particularly the current additional municipal commissioner, Mrs. Ashwini Bide, was really instrumental in bringing about the changes. So this started with the the year before last was the 80th anniversary of the Quit India movement. And as most of you will know, August Kranti Maidan was the kind of prime location where the first steps towards Quit India movement took place. So these are just some of the visuals that we found on the internet of the old Maidan. Most of these buildings are still there. It's largely the same at the moment. We looked, so as we were working with the BMC, we looked at, actually there are a number of other significant historic sites in this area. Tejpal Hall was the first seat of the Congress. August Kranti Maidan is where most of the movement took place. There's of course Mani Bhavan. There is also a part of the Dandi March took place at Girgaon Chowpatty. And then finally, in current times, there is a garden here with Lokmanya Tilak's Smarak. So we were just thinking if we can connect all these using a trail, where if you have visitors to these sites, they might, deviate and try and find these other sites as well. So when we first got to the Maidan, which actually is really ingrained into the community's activities, but it is completely out of sight. Like if you were to pass by the Maidan 2 years ago, you wouldn't know there is an open space behind. So the front, the periphery of the Maidan was covered with, not anymore. There was a BEST canteen and shelter. This is part of the same canteen. There was a Sulabh Shauchalay, and there was an SWD BMC Chowki. Uh, there was a lot of parking. This is something we have not been physically through the project, we've not been able to do. It needs soft programming with BMC and the traffic police. But there's a lot of tempo parking, which still continues. There was a lot of, this is something we see in a lot of streets where, people living in the area put out plants and flower pots as a means to try and stop antisocial behavior. But actually that in itself starts hindering the footpath. And then this is what the Maidan was like. I'll just take you to the plan actually. So what had happened over the last 60 or 70 years is that each part of the community had made a niche for themselves in the Maidan. Luckily, there was still a large space here, which was largely used for cricket and football and similar play sport. This is a Gandhi Memorial, which was built in 1972. This little ground here, so there's a school just on the edge of the Maidan, and the ground has been leased by BMC to the school for children's activities. That still exists in part. There is a Nana Nani Park here. There was, and still is, sorry. There was a children's play area here with all the equipment, and then in this far corner was a volleyball ground, which was used for all activities other than volleyball, as you might imagine. And each of these, the red lines that you see, are all fences in various states of deterioration. And this is what the original Maidan was like, except for this central pathway, nothing else existed. In 1972, as you can see, there was a little bit of making of, so the Gandhi Smarak came in and there was a bit of partitioning. But when we got to the site, this is how it was. So actually, when you go through here, you feel really uncomfortable actually. And then this is what we had proposed and what we've managed to accomplish because of large support from the BMC and from the AMC. So the central pathway remains. We've brought down all the internal fences. The Gandhi Smarak remains. Nana Nani Park remains. The D Ward Assistant Commissioner requested that the children's play area be brought here so that this becomes one large space. And I'll just take you through some before-after photos. So this is how we started off. And actually, this is what it looks like now. So all the chowkis have been relocated or found a different space. This is the central pathway, which is still there, but it's completely open. And you miss a lot of that when you're walking through because all you're seeing is barricades. So it's both visually and physically quite unappealing. And then as we started working on the project, we worked on it with the heritage team and the BMC, and they found out that the railroad bridge was being pulled down, and there were some great basalt stone piers which needed a new home rather than a dump yard. So we, after talking, sorry. Sure, this is going to move. After managing to get approvals in the ongoing work, this is what. It's not going just a few slides. I'll just. I won't get into the details, but yeah, this was a traffic island which was barricaded. It looks like this today. The statue was almost not visible. We've put in this kind of red lacquer strip which marks the Freedom Trail. I was just going to end with a few points to ponder really, because looking at the kind of definition of commons, which is different from public spaces where the community is deeply involved in the spaces, I think somewhere along the way we seem to have the public feeling very entitled to that space, which is okay. I'm not putting it as a negative or a positive. It's just a few points to ponder. So the minute we got the wall up again, we found certain quite interesting characteristics and elements that have come from a nearby community. Again, while the painting work, it had been taken off and they brought it back. The other thing was the more challenging thing is always the parking. This is what the periphery of the Maidan was like. The original footpath was removed and the cars were parking all the way to the Maidan wall. We brought the footpath back in, but people just continued to park the way they were. And again, we had to bring the bollards back in. And finally, it is this kind of, I don't know, kind of blurry world between religion and politics at the moment, which again, there is a lot of usage of these spaces. So the bollards are now being used for constructing mandaps, and then the space that was freed up by the AMC is now being used as a, or not constantly, but temporary mandap and different festivals. So I just thought it's going to happen, and all we need to do is just have and find that middle ground so that both can exist together. I think eventually that's our kind of conundrum. But we chose to show this project today because we thought it had a 90% or 95% win and very few losses in that sense.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Uh, so again, I think very different kinds of processes. One is where Ketki was telling us that you don't have to involve the government at all. You can work completely with the local community because there's a lot going on there as well. And how do you kind of engage with, at the forming of the commons, the shaping of the commons, protecting the commons from ways in which we've historically had the commons where a modern bureaucracy probably was not involved. So how do you kind of work with that? And then Urmi sort of bringing in again completely different scales. One is working with legislative mechanisms, but also then looking at the brass tacks of how something gets built and shaped and protected. Because it's otherwise it's always about something building something new all the time, but also discovering those little moments of things that are already there, and how do you kind of preserve and conserve some of those, and how do you bring that into the public realm. I think very different kinds of processes and projects. But now a little bit more provocation because I think it's nice that all of you have like we began in the beginning, all of you are in some ways interested in the public realm, however difficult it is, however it's however much it is being challenged. But I think just to kind of then follow up with that, some block questions that we can group to some of you also because of the kinds of practices that you all are engaged in. Rohit and Samir, if you can think about what does it mean, in a context today where the government is in some ways giving away land to private, interests, real estate interests, in the name of the commons. So for example, Dharavi, it's called a public project, but it's given away to one of the biggest corporates. And the race course, there's huge discussion that's going on in the race course. Again, this whole idea of it's also called a public space and an open space, but again there's something else going on. So if you can reflect on that, um, but also also the idea of the extensions, the salt pans again are being given away in some ways to private interests. So how do architects respond to that? And just sorry, just a kind of addition to that because we don't have a lot of time. This is a time when a lot of public projects are no longer, in the realm of architects. I mean that era is gone. Um, but how can you consider private projects as public projects because they affect everyone? They're out there, they're in the public realm. And I'm just talking about, say, for example, the Nita Mukesh Ambani Cultural Center. It's complete private funds, but it's a cultural space. Do we as citizens have anything to say about those private projects? Can do would you be able to classify certain projects beyond a certain scale as public, although they are funded privately? And again, what do architects have to say about that? I'll just group all the questions if you can remember them. They're not difficult. This is to the three of you. To Mayuri and Pranav, if it is, I mean, how do you think of, I mean, some of your work is already going beyond standards and you're starting to look at, questions of typologies, of living. But what do you think, how do you kind of think of uh, people who make cities their homes? you know like, for example, a lot of times public projects land up cleansing spaces, spaces that are being used by the homeless, they're being used by, like today we have into an economy where you don't have 9 to 5 jobs. People are like Swiggy agents, and they are kind of all kinds of agents who are using the city as the home. So how do you bring, because a lot of times leisure becomes the way we look at city. I think to you kind of also look at the idea of incrementality, then how do you design for incrementality? Yeah, and also then what would a pedagogy of incrementality be? Like, if, because in schools otherwise we are trained to go from this clear land, and then a project, and then you kind of execute it and it's done, right? So what is that pedagogy? And I think, again, to Urmi, again, coming back to this idea of standards, like, because again you have in your work also noticed series of smaller moments that need to be preserved, negotiated, and perhaps standards, like you're seeing parking happening again on those roads, or you have to clean up certain roads because the pandal comes up there, but we find it difficult that the pandal has come up there, but the city has occupied it, city has a life. So how do we factor in some of these into the way we think of urban design? And then Dushant has after that.
Yeah, the question was about the position with, I mean, kind of. I think there are lots of myths that we have to actively, I mean, keep on arguing against. One is the myth that without, yes, there is a space where private capital is required, right? But somehow we are in this mindset that the city doesn't have money, that without private inter, inputs, nothing can happen, and that is something that we have to really question. Mumbai is a fairly rich city. There is a lot of money, and I mean, there is, like, last couple of months ago, there was a call for taking over gardens and maidans. They had some guidelines for private sponsorship of gardens and maidans, and as if BMC didn't have money to actually take care of gardens and maidans. So they have money, they have the people. So I think there is a basic change in our mindset that, I mean, I'm not saying private developers are not required. They are required. There is a space in which they have to exist. But that doesn't mean that they have to exist everywhere. And I think that is one of the things that we have to be clear about. I mean, in the suggestions, objections for that guidelines, that is what I contributed. Why do you have this guideline? I mean, BMC has money, BMC has resources. Why do you require anybody to 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 kind of take up? So I think that is one of the areas that we have to be very attentive about. And for example, I don't know how many this was out there in the social media. you have to take the effort of actually going and making those suggestions and objections, and eventually it does work. I mean, even though it's a very slow journey, eventually it does work, and we don't do that. I think one of the, if you have to defend the commons, we have to defend it almost like sentinels, and every opportunity that you see that there is an encroachment, try and express. Personally, I'm a very firm believer in democratic processes. I think, see some of the slides and some of there is a tendency in academia as well as in practice to see almost architects as something which, that the bureaucrats are evil, that the developers are evil, and we are some wise people who have solutions for everything. I don't think the real world is like that. I mean, for example, I don't know, one of the experiences I had when I was something that doesn't almost exist in India. I mean, we don't consider that as a career at all, as if it was something like a, something that we are not supposed to, I mean, some kind of an outcast community. It's not true. I mean, I think these are careers that we must, and I think the ways to defend the commons in the long term is to try and extend our professional areas of work. I mean, I don't know how many architects, I mean, academy for the last so many years, I can count 3 people who have joined bureaucracy out of so many thousands of past students.
Given away for private
See,
interests.
how do you respond in the sense, that it's difficult actually, because they are going by a certain book. There is a tender, it's an open tender, who will qualify, etc., etc. So procedurally, it is very difficult to to uh, to actually counter something like that. I mean, one can only do it with with. Uh, I mean, with I mean, suggesting counter examples. There are counter examples even within India. I mean, there are places which have been redeveloped without necessarily too much, and I think we need a few of those examples to work, to then being taken up as something that is workable. I mean, I think going to the going to develop private developers is the easiest way out. It's kind of the tendency of the bureaucracy is to, it is not my problem anymore. So there is a tendency for bureaucracy to act like brokers rather than managers or trustees of the commons. I think that is a shift that we must demand, that you are not brokers of giving somebody else the right to exploit what you're supposed to be trustees of. You are trustees and it's your job to do it. I mean, we have almost accepted the role that administration is going to be broking deals rather than doing their job. I mean, and that is a different kind of a combat. I mean, but I think that is the level at which we need to respond. It is not. I mean, if you follow the process of Dharavi tender, I don't think you may find any loopholes, right? Uh, the criticism could be why. I mean, why should something like this be necessary? I mean,
Can I add?
yeah.
So, while researching for our book, which is across 6 metros, London, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Delhi, and Mumbai, the land ownership is more private than public in all non-Indian cities. We are both in Delhi and Mumbai, we are 50-50. 50% land is owned by in the public and 50 is with the private, whereas in all other cities, it is different. Hong Kong obviously is a different model because the entire land is owned by the government and it is put on lease. So they have a complete ownership of the land in that way. We've also mentioned something in the book as a core belief where we begin that land belongs to the public and the people. So it is we who are leasing it to the government. So the government is the custodian of land on our behalf. So that again brings to the same point that that reminder needs to be given to them that this is how things operate. and they should work towards the public domain and not as a private developer. Again, coming back to and looking into the cities where land is more owned by the private agency than the public, but what role did the government or the sovereign played in that? They made sure that a part of that land which is now private is put to public use. So be it even social housing through rental, or even generating a chunk of affordable housing, or having, I mean, there are negative connotations to these things like privately owned public spaces. You can talk about gentrification in them, but again uh, the edge is not very sharp, you know. They are trying to blur this, and lot emerges out of it, and there is somewhere a process of including communities, taking their consent, which is not beyond just the nod, and making them a part of the design process. So in Tokyo, this is very well pronounced, where public participation can be taken to the court. So it is a legal right, which is not there in any city, be it New York or London, and we are far away from that. But it is only in Tokyo where the community kind of comments onto the project, large infrastructure projects also, but whatever their say is, they can uphold that in the court, in the legal court. So in a way, a process is there. Right now, there is no process. Just before we started talking, you know, we were talking about the race course and kya hoga and what will happen. I said, even if, you know, we can be a part of the design right at this stage when they're contemplating of what to do with this place. Even their commitment to have it as a public park is there in the newspaper, but what will they do? After building it, we go and say, no, it's no longer as public as we thought you said it would be. Then they say, you've missed the bus. Similar thing happened with Coastal Road. So, but in Tokyo, where the model is there, where you have to discuss, you have to inform. So something like this, a systemic change is which needs to come into place, and then the government is, you know, they want to become they are a facilitator now. They no longer want to construct, but in the recent past, that shift has happened with BDD, and we see where Mahada and other government organizations are contracting. So there are different models: BDD, Sitco, B or BKC, and ownership models. But the larger chunk is there, that how do we control what is being built in it? So when we had also proposed a development model for Dharavi, it was through Community Land Trust, which had a different kind of a ownership pattern, where government does become a part of it, but it is not the sole. Even so, these are the areas where, you know, we have to show them as solutions. Mostly public participation or people coming together through activism or anything is either through a grievance, they crib about it, they are complaining about it. But how many go with a solution to them and make it workable based on their understanding? So they have a certain way of thinking, a certain mindset, which is interdepartment, which is file, which is hierarchical, a lot of these things. So for them to kind of understand what we are proposing or talking, there's a lot of communication gap. So how we bridge that gap is also something which I think we as a fraternity need to understand right enough. The way we teach or how we work towards implementation or management. We do not have MBA. I mean, very few architects do MBA and then go or for communication to talk to them. And people who have MBAs are also becoming designers. So it is like how we communicate our idea to them. I mean, what Mayuri mentioned is that, you know, this is the process they followed. You have a manifesto and then exhibition, then conference, then publication. We are trying it, publication, implementation through experiments, comparisons. So making them sing their song in a different way. It's a very difficult task, but that communication has to come in play. Then whatever we suggest, you know, whether it's private, public, I mean, they are still an elephant who can just spin their tail in a different direction and everything will go. So you have a competitor today, Adani versus Reliance. I mean, it's just constructed over these years to make uh, an entity through which you can facilitate. So how much public is going through private or private to public is a different story. And we will soon see a lot of this coming up. Two places we are working on, things will come. Another set of largest green coming into the city is a reclamation behind Tough Parade, Machimar Nagar. Okay, if you see in the DP, you will see that green patch. Then is the eastern waterfront. It is a central thing. All port land is center, but which state of will it become gifted to the state or the private agency will take it up? So all these are models of ownership. So if we can make them understand, communicate to them, only then there is some bridge that we are building. So I think a communication is a big part of to make things do differently.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's the case that as architects, we know that Mumbai is super dense and we are, desperate for more open space, and anything that is there should be preserved and not developed and converted into private built space. But the way the power structure is set up, there's no incentives in the government structure to actually allow that to happen, because governments have very different incentives. First of all, the top leadership is not even from Mumbai. I don't know if you've had a single chief minister from Bombay in the whole of Maharashtra's history, right? I doubt it, because the votes are elsewhere if you look at the aggregate, And it tends to be the case for senior leadership elsewhere also. BMC has IAS officers in senior leadership. So there's a strong case for us trying to have maybe a senior elected officer for Mumbai who can control government decisions. That's something we should probably look at in the future, who's answerable to the people of Mumbai. And secondly, the only option I think for us as architects and as citizens is to start speaking up a lot more loudly to influence those in power. We have a democracy, and sometimes I think we're scared to use it. We don't speak up enough. We don't shout, scream, talk enough. We say, oh, let it be, there's some protest, oh, jane do, I'll watch house instead, or do something like that. And you see elsewhere in China, there are people being jailed. There, if you look at, studies done, there are like thousands of protests in China. And they're done at severe costs to their personal life, freedom, whatever. And still they do it. And we have this gift of democracy, and we're still not actually making full use of it and using it. So I think these are the two things we should probably think about with respect to this.
Okay, so we're talking about how people use the city, how they occupy it. So I think one is that we recognize that people were occupying spaces that they're not supposed to occupy. But like, what are they there for? Like, why are they even there? It's not because they have a home somewhere and then they're coming and staying here, right? There's some reason that they're there. So in all the spaces that we've designed, we've always kept them open and free and accessible 24/7. So that was one of the stipulations when we started Mumbai Mile. The other thing was to, even though we're using CSR funds, we've always told every person or every person involved who's paying the money that you will not have your name on it. We will write something and we will put your name somewhere, but it will not be visible. It will, so even if, HDFC or Loda or anybody is paying for it, nobody knows. So the idea is that it has to at least feel like a public space. It should not be a Godrej Park or a Tata Garden. It should have that freedom in its name in the first place. Then it should be physically free and allow people to use and access it at any point and anyhow they like also, that they just come in and go out and do whatever they want. The other thing is also, I think, in terms of how you use it. So I'll bring up the example of Carter Road. So a lot of people asked us that why aren't you putting in children's parks? Why aren't you putting in basketball hoops? I'm like, I don't know any kids who are coming here who can afford a basketball. But at Carter Road, there's now a skate park. But the skate park came after PK Das made Carter Road as only a promenade. So all our spaces, as they've got to evolve over time. So our Maidans will evolve into more specialized sporting facilities if we allow them to grow like that. So that is something that is, I think, intangible. It's not easy to define that in 10 years this space under the bridge can have some specialized facility or not. But I'm saying that let's just leave it. Let's keep spaces open and free for people to use the way they like to, and at the same time giving them safety. So like for example, the barricades, the plants and the steel that you see in under the bridge, those are all engineered so if a truck comes and crashes into it, it doesn't kill someone who's sitting on the other side of it. So there's that kind of basic idea of safety of that space, and having that whole space free for however you'd like to use. Then I think, like, if I can just answer a little bit of what the public thinks. So I think what happens is that a lot of members of the public just have no trust in the government or anything. They see that someone's going to do something on the race course and they're like, oh, it's going to be bad. There's no option also that it may be good. I myself have no doubt it's going to be bad. But like, what do we do about this? How do we then involve ourselves in this picture that we don't let that happen, or we at least bring this policy, or we inform policy in such a way that it can change. Like, I'm really not interested in doing any of this work anymore because of just the effort that it takes. It's like 5, 8, 10 years getting, like nothing, and getting your brains fried. Someone telling me, there was a person in the RTO who actually told me that Indians don't walk on the road. Indians don't walk, is what I was told. So I lost it. You know, that's what happens. I don't know how else to respond to those kind of things. So if we can kind of formulate some way to inform policy, I think that's where we have to be.
Yeah, I mean, uh, the question about there's a life on the streets, the urban life, whether it's migrants who are kind of for whom it's a home. It's not only a workspace, or they're hanging out full day eating. It's like the ecosystem. No? They sleep here, they eat here, they go to a eatery. The public toilet becomes a way to kind of wash, collect water. So the idea is that somehow through all the projects they've been if they're integral part of the domains of sites. For example, Maulana Shaukat Ali Road, it's if you look at the earlier street design methods and manuals, they're kind of fairly European in nature. You have space for the outdoor cafes, and it's like a boulevard. But I think for when you're doing Maulana Shaukat Ali Road design, it is you to reinvent what the domains are there. There is the Lakdi Bazaar and all the kind of loading, unloading of the old darwaza and all is happening there. People who work in the bazaar are sleeping there, they're eating there on the pavement. So the pavement is kind of full of all these different kinds of activities. Currently, if you look at the way government imagine these forces as kind of illegal, or they want to prioritize they want to, when they're designing the road, they want to make like 3-lane or 4-lane road and minimize the kind of in between pavement space, or pavement and in between pavement and the road space. But actually, if you look at streets are thresholds now, where all the kind of lives, bazaars, everything, all the activities are spilling out onto that space. So if you're only looking at the vehicular street and not giving space for that in-between thing, that thing is going to collide with the vehicular. That's why I think a lot of traffic jam happens in the Maulana Shaukat Road. All the loading, unloading, migrant sleeping spaces, their eating spaces, they're all kind of spilling onto the vehicular lane. So the idea is you look at all the domains which exist on the ground and figure in harmony in between all of them. They don't collide and they exist well with each other. So that has been the kind of a method for the street. But even public toilets, I think they've been they always looked at people as threat, that like homeless aega, kharab karega, thukega. But I think if you give a good public utility, we've seen that people respect it. They'll keep the idea is when you think of them as threat and kind of put a railing around it, boundary around it, I think there is a way to kind of break it in such sense. If you give a good, soft, nice infrastructure, respectfully to public, and public is what I mean is even a homeless person is a public, a migrant is a public, or someone driving by is a public. So there's kind of all variety of kind of people. So I think it's important to treat them integral part of your.
Yeah, coming back to housing, because if you're talking about incrementality, I would like to tie it up with the question of Dharavi redevelopment as well. So when we talk about incrementality, incrementality is in human nature. I would say that, you know, no matter where we are living, where we are constantly evolving the home or the house that we are living in, where we think of it's never like, you know, you buy a house and you invest X amount of money and that's it, and you never change anything in the house. It's never like that. It's constantly growing, it's constantly changing, and that is the case that we see in most of the informal settlements and also the urban villages, where the idea of the home begins with the idea of how do you improve the house or progress as you move forward. Like, you know, when you earn some more money, then you're increasing the house, your family is expanding. uh, so that creates a certain different kind of sense of ownership to the place. And especially when you're talking about urban villages, they have been living in the same place for more than 500 400 years. So that brings in certain different kind of rootedness into the house, where incrementality becomes a way of life or a way of living. It is never the same house that you'll see over the years. There is always some changes or additions or subtractions that are happening over a period of time. And you know, interestingly, what happens is that, you know, we always see redevelopment as erasing everything and building a new building as an answer, but we fail to recognize the beauty of this incrementality in terms of that the house or the home is already there. Then what is the question that we are really solving? I mean, then the question remains is about the commons and not really the house in itself. Because when we talk about a practice in terms of the bottom up approach, we have conducted various workshops in different Kolivada, say Dharavi and Versova. We've also informal settlements of Dharavi and Govandi and so on. So whenever you try to understand the grassroots level issues, nobody really points out housing as an issue. If you talk to them, they will point out concerns in terms of water, sanitation, roads, infrastructure, common places. But it is very rarely that somebody will say ghar is a problem. If you ask them, "Aapko ghar chahiye?" "हाँ हाँ हमको घर चाहिए." That is the kind of response. It never comes as a first-hand response, because it is inbuilt in the nature. Most of them are coming from the villages, where you have to build a house in the village on your own and you are improving it over a period of time. So it's a given. It's never like, you know, when I'll arrive in the city, I'll have a house of my own. It is, um, that's how organically or naturally the process begins with. So the question then comes to the commons, and I think that's a very win-win situation. And no, if you are actually looking at the incremental house as a model, then what happens is, as a redevelopment, there is zero investment in terms of housing. You're then, as a government, you're investing only on the commons, providing infrastructure and a better question of the built environment, question of the ecology, and the way of life. I think that is what incrementality brings in as a pedagogical practice. That's all.
So you asked about negotiations. It's very complicated. I mean, the negotiations, I wouldn't call it that. I think there are multiple stakeholders which we directly deal with because of a particular research or a particular project. But there are so many hidden stakeholders. So at every scale, what we've been trying to do is not looking at, typically if a policy comes out by the government, be it on housing or public transport or any kind of anything in the urban realm, our approach is typically, that's fine, you're doing XYZ, but you can improve it by doing ABC. Like even when, as Mr. Shinkre earlier said, that we look at developers as, an evil thing, but it's not. I mean, it's something we won't be able to stop. It's how gentrification happens and places are going to change. I live in the Dadar Parsi colony area, and Parsi colony is still okay, but if you look at Matunga, almost, I would say, more than 50% of the old town planning buildings are down, and there's just high rises. So usually our approach with any government agency is that, can we get better infrastructure? Because no doubt, if you're going to have a 20-story building, you're going to have that many number of new cars, you're going to have that much loading on your water supply, electricity, other utilities. So that is kind of at that urban scale. When it comes to the street interventions, so I mean, one of the main things is that in India, I think across most cities, all livelihoods happen in the street. So we don't get into those debates with the BMC or any governmental agency at all. What we try and do is, what our approach is, that you improve the standards, you improve the kind of construction quality, you improve longevity. And then over time, as regulations, policies happen, things will change. We may not see it in our lifetimes, but eventually, hopefully, there will be a change. What we've seen more difficult is actually with the kind of, for loss of a better word, the more affluent communities are the ones who create most hindrances in what we are trying to do. So what we found, like, just a simple thing is, we wanted to put in benches, just like precast concrete benches, which are long lasting in most of these streets, in different nooks, like not throughout the street. But communities in Chembur, in Dadar, like residents were completely against it, because they were continuously worried about people coming there and causing, maybe antisocial behavior or drinking. But that happens even without the benches. Actually, what we've seen is that the benches are used really well by students, by, people who come and work for all these same residents who are complaining against it. And I think we found that a bit more difficult to deal with, because it is this kind of residents who are very cushy in their homes, who are actually against what we're trying to do, because they are worried that there's someone, that they can't deal with. And we've been trying to tell them that that's actually a policing problem, because the antisocial behavior will exist no matter what. There is so much one can do. So we actually found that, I mean, I personally found that more difficult, whereas most of the other communities, other agencies, they kind of let us work, and then, they come back. But they do cooperate. So there are many, like in the Chembur area near the railway station, there were several stalls which were okay to kind of either stop their business or relocate for 7 to 10 days for the work to get completed. But actually, when it came to the bigger shops, they were the ones who, managed to get the local cooperator and stop the work. So the way we see those negotiations is quite different from what is actually probably perceived of them.
Uh, s- yeah. So when you started, we said that we are losing the commons, and I think that's one of the things that, I mean, I would take out of what she said. I think uh, there is a class of people who have influence, who are not engaging with the urban commons anymore. Right? So much of what happens there is considered as an inconvenience, as an aberration, and what we want is a nice, clean, neat city, because that's what we saw, when we traveled to Europe or something like that. So I think uh, there is an image of public space which is actually quite alien to what public space is in our cities. And I think one of the things that we could do as architects is to generate alternative images, because to do those projects may take many years. And also, there are so many groups, and what I'm amazed is with this kind of sense of entitlement that we have, that we just feel that we will propose and everybody will just say bravo and let's do it, kind of thing. It is tiring, I agree. Uh, uh, having worked in Europe, the profession has earned its credential. It is not that they were just offered everything on a platter, ki baba, you know, you guys are architects, so please do what you want. It's not like that. I think it's a long process and the process is longer now because it's a democracy. So I just think we need a critical mass of good enough work, good enough processes to then say that, okay, we want to change the system. Why should anybody listen to us when we say that we want to change the system? Is there any reason why anybody would listen to us? So I think we have to be very humble, try to do little things and multiple those little things to start gaining some kind of credibility. There is some merit in listening to these people. Otherwise, why would they listen to us? I mean, why would a corporator, why would a IAS officer listen to a planner or an architect? Or,
So I just want to, I mean, you almost, mention half of my question, which was also, I mean, I would like to just, stir things a little bit because I've been on both sides of the process. Like, I was sucked into this process of, providing for some public infrastructure. In one of these BMC long list, people or stakeholders which are there. On the other hand, like also pitched for few things. But on the other hand, like by being in this process, I've also engaged with a lot of people who are using those spaces. Like, for example, I just suddenly found out that across all these projects, I mean, they are quite close to where I stay. Somehow just there's nothing beyond Andheri or until Borivali or something. Um, Also mention, like for example, the Bandra station, design that you made, or maybe the under flyover. I stay very close to that flyover. I mean, I've heard stories like, one day I was traveling in the rickshaw and that rickshaw wala tells me, इधर तो ना अभी थोड़े दिनों में market लग जाएगा. I was amazed to hear that. There are so many other forces, or the voice of the common, as we, trying to, or maybe, and at that moment of time, I was like, what is happening? Why is he thinking of this infrastructure as a market? And, in under the flyover, I was walking across that place, and I was sitting there for a while, and I was seeing people interact. And I spoke to a few people there, like, from the community there near that ICICI bank. So he just told me कि अरे इधर तो theater बनने वाला है. It was in the most initial period, like when it just got constructed. It was like इधर तो theater बनने वाला है. And I was just thinking, like, across all of these things, like they become like, and trying to think of it as a political act. I think we as architects, we think that we are maybe like, taking this point ahead. And also I think what Ketki was saying and what Jasmine said, ki there's a gap in how we are able to communicate with everyone, either with the people or maybe with the BMC or other agencies which are involved. There's one level of entitlement, or maybe you can say assumed perception of things, like assumed perception of a public life or a public space, which we try to sort of mobilize with our current access and, possibilities that are there in our hands. But for a moment, what if, we don't think like architects, like we don't think as, this entitled set of or group of people, and try to open things up, or try to kind of, understand what's really happening. And within that, my also other question was that, are we really designers, or are we really facilitators? Are we negotiators? Are we, something beyond just, this identity of an architect? So that's one. The other thing, what Ketki was saying, that, very precisely actually, where they don't get the question of space. And all that we try to talk through is the question of space. And I think it would be interesting if, maybe coming from your experiences or coming from your own projects, or maybe any articulations that you may have, how do you locate this question of space to the commons or to the BMC on either ends. And considering architecture or our installations, like, what you showed, this protest which was happening on that toilet, like we provide a new ground, a new political ground actually, because it also comes with a certain sense of what the public is. And there's also the public at the other end, which is trying to think of it as the market, a theater, or maybe a space for protest or other things. So I think we kind of located a kind of lock between all of this. So are there maybe ideas or maybe perspectives to this, or maybe being able to locate this question of space?
I would like to, besides, design, there is another thing called adequacy. So the moment we are talking about, before we understand the use of that space, the other person who's passing by already imagines the space to be used for something else. And this happens pretty often. We are able to, combine 2 or 3 usages together. Like in the toilet project you have seen, the 2 or 3 uses have been combined together into one facility. The places which we have also designed, we have seen that how it can be used for multiple things. It can be outdoor school, or it can be a performing area, discussion area, or to make TikTok videos, or for the women to gather and just have their outdoor kitties, because there is such less space within them. So it all calls for the adequacy of space. Because there is such less adequacy and appropriation, that people want to use whichever space they get as public and free for multiple things, and they appropriate it the way they want. So no matter how good a designer is, it will still get appropriated because the usage itself is multifold. Imagine if you put 4 usage to it, and the population which is using, how many permutation combinations will arise out of it. So it brings us back to the same question of your national building codes, how much per capita is put into it, and how conventional planning is done. Our conventional planning today even is through the regulations where, FSI is there. What she was talking about, TP schemes being redeveloped now. I mean, you enter Juhu, it's crazy right now. I don't know how they're going to survive, but still, the Juhu scheme has a restriction on number of kitchens, which basically means your density will be under control. That is from their society. But otherwise, there's no restriction on FSI. So what I'm trying to say is, if we flip this, that is what we have also proposed in our book, that it is the amenities based on which your population, the carrying capacity is taken, and you have density caps. There is no limitation on FSI, because let the politician have fun. Let them reach infinity with FSI. But the moment you have a density cap and you say ki only this amount of amenity should support this many people, you build as much as you want. So there are certain ways in which you can also bring equality and through adequacy. And then the design flows in where we can visualize, say, people who are in luxury apartments in front. They don't like the metro view. They want manicured medians to come in. So those things keep on adding to the city when there is this space. But right now we have planned our cities like that, that we have manufactured spaces less for the public and more for the private, which will generate revenue. Dharavi became a talking point only when a certain architect showed or unlocked, as they call, the value of that land. So anything you calculate is a negative from that. So if any model is proposed, the government thinks it's a negative from what I could have done. So their thinking is in a different manner altogether. So no matter what the design is, it really does not matter. For Dharavi, Norman Foster has gone. Everybody has, designed and gone. So it's not the design who's doing the talking. So how do we communicate through these things with the government?
I want to add to what Rohit said about the difference between Europe and India and how each of us, each of our cultures views public space. So I think there is a big difference, as he pointed out, where in Europe, there's a very strong cultural awareness of what public space is. So everyone does their part to make it happen, whether it's somebody in government, whether it's an architect out of government, whether it's a municipal engineer. There are standards for these things, and they all work together to make sure that happens, because somehow it is part of their cultural consciousness. And I think in India, it is not part of our cultural consciousness. I don't know what the reason for it is. Possibly we were ruled by a foreign power for many years. So we've internalized the idea that, we should just look at our own house and whatever's outside, will happen, by itself. But I think we should be conscious of this, and we should maybe think about how to create some kind of a common awareness that common spaces are very important. They really make the difference between life and death in a city. All the more so because our cities are so super dense and super crowded. It really, they really have a very important role to play.
I just wanted to add something to that, well, or maybe even a bit more of a critical kind of take on that is, I mean, having worked in the UK in the corporate sector, in the real estate, this one standard statement I always make, that when it comes to developers, they are the same all the world round. And I think what actually, I don't think it's necessarily a part of their culture. They do appreciate a lot of the open space, they do appreciate cleanliness, but a lot of these cities never were that clean or that open. They face the same densities, but what has happened over a period of time is that even though we might be left behind with certain legacies of rulers, what has happened there is that there's a lot of governance, there's a lot of accountability. So, and there are guidelines which are very stringent. So, even though a lot of their construction might only be really low rise and quite sparse, they still have to go through certain kind of loopholes without which they won't get planning permission. So in that sense, I feel that there is a lot of tick box exercise, but because the government guidelines are so stringent and the government itself, like the local government itself, is accountable to make sure that those are put into place as developments take place, I feel that is a kind of a bigger driver than, of course, I agree with you that there are certain communities, there are certain urban villages which are very much involved in their local area, their schools, playgrounds, etc. But when you look at larger cities, it is eventually down to governance and accountability, which is something that needs to be strengthened in our scenario, where where even within government the departments are accountable for certain infrastructure, for certain provisions, which there is somehow a gap between what is guidelines and what is the final outcome. The guidelines are there.
I'm just going to just because it's this really kind of extended very very long, but I mean it's some really interesting comments. So if you can hold on to that and we just open it up to the audience, just get like one or two questions and then you can respond with what you have, formulated right now. So anyone?
I have just a point to make, but before that, thanks all of you, because it's very inspiring for all of them, all of us to kind of, all of them and all of us figuring out how do you enter, what do you do, how do you navigate, and all of them, all of us who are interested in cities, I think for them, your presentations are very inspiring to kind of, that things can be done, things can be moved around and stuff like that. So thank you very much for that. I have a point to make, and this is, I think when we started talking about it and then completed this is the difference between the commons and the public. And I think this is a very important difference to kind of, remember, because the commons have to do, the etymology is from the community and the public is from the citizen. So the relationship of the common resource with the community is different than the relationship of the public with the citizen. For example, in Ketuki's, the fishing community and its fishing ground is a community, is a commons. Without the fishing ground, the fishing community doesn't exist. But without a Maidan, the public exists. The public can exist. The stakes are very different. So, so the relationship is of the public and the citizen is that of a clientele. And what seems to be happening over here is really a hijack of the commons by the public, because there's so much invoking of the state and the government over here, and I think that's the critical.
how do you reclaim the commons is something, and particularly at this moment, because this is a very critical moment where the state and the government is hijacking all spaces, and it is doing that in the name of the public. But it is the commons then which will hold on, and neighborhoods and communities, and the example of with Samir kind of of the dry fire hydrant. I think these reclaimings are super important for us to kind of still hold on to the commons as a resource, because it's the commons which will lend. The relationship of the commons and the community is dialectical. They both make each other. If we allow the commons to be hijacked by the public, by the government and the state, then there is no community. There is only client. It's a clientele. So I think that's a very critical thing to remember. How do we kind of then work with the communities, keeping the boundaries clear? How do you kind of work? And for the incrementality model, for example, we in our studies we found that the moment you include state in Karnataka housing policies, it doesn't work, because the state will come with its standards, it will come with its various logics of tendering, etc., 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 etc. Then what do you do as an architect? Where do you enter? What do you kind of work with the community? What does it mean? What is the pedagogy of it to enter? So I think this distinction between the public and the commons is very important, and not allowing its hijack of the commons by the public. I think that is the only point that I want to make.
Hello. Yeah, I just want to add to what you were saying about reclaiming the commons. So I just want to share a very small incidents that recently there were 13 Kolivadas which were under demarcation process, where the demarcation was released, and Warsaw was one of them. So we were trying to work with the community to list down the objections and suggestions in terms of the demarcation. And the demarcation was limited only to the housing part of the community. But the community was trying to argue that what about our, so there were two aspects with the commons and the public. Like there are public lands which are owned by the community, which were excluded from the demarcation. And then there was also commons, which was the mangroves and the creek, where their dependency lies, and they are also excluded. So how do you bring in the legalities or the tenure in terms of or the inclusion of these within the boundary, or how do you define this is a kolivada? That was the question that that really comes into place. So the moment you exclude a community owned land from the boundary of the village, it is eligible for a very different kind of or nature of development, which is not in sync, or it's not really compatible with the community's needs. Or even the commons, when you start excluding even the smallest thing like declaring mangroves as forests. So you're protecting the forest, yes, but then are we really stopping the community from really entering the forest, and their relationship is somewhere hampered? So I think these dualities are really something that we really need to talk about. Yeah.
Actually, my comment was what we were discussing within the panel, that we are comparing, Europe and the way planning has emerged there. I mean, if we say, see London, for example, London had local area plans before the Greater London was even formulated. So they themselves, as different counties earlier and today as different boroughs, have their own local area plans, local development plans, they call it. And that is much more stronger. The voice which that plan has is much more stronger. And there was a time when all this was stitched together and the Greater London plan was kicked out. That this is not what London is about. And it is only very recently that you have the whole planning as seen as a city level plan. Whereas here in Mumbai, it is a different thing. We just have one plan. We do not have zonal plans. We do not have ward plans. We do not have local area, nothing. So to have that kind of ownership with your neighborhood is difficult. And where there the planning itself from day one has been done at that scale. So the ownership is very strong of the public domain there. And because we are talking about the different social class has a different relationship with the space in front of them. So the people who are there and who have do not have space, their usage is different, but their involvement in what needs to happen there is also very different. We did an exercise with one of the associations in Cuff Parade, because the Cuff Parade metro station is right in the central area. Both sides, they are residential buildings, and they were not happy with the plan which MMRC has prepared. So the all the association of the building associations came together. So whether that can be commons, you would like to call them as commons, because they have been living in different buildings with their own separate associations, but because it was a common issue of 12 buildings both sides, including Taj President Hotel, they all came together that what comes here is what we will see every day, or what usage will come here. We are the ones who see it on an everyday basis. So they came together and we made a plan for them to negotiate with MMRC as to what can come. So these are examples of neighborhood planning and local planning, which only when citizens take the ownership they come together and this dialogue happens. For that to happen, whether public behaves as common or we rely on only the commons like the community of a fishing village as commons. So this collective will keep on evolving the way our governance and development is in the city.
Okay, there's one last question. Rajit.
Not a question, but to what you just said right now, I mean, the last sentence where you were explaining your interaction with Taj set of people, it reminded me of the example of Oval Maidan and the community that changed that to who came together and advocated and then has taken over its management, and how the space has completely shifted from a public how the nature of space from a very from a common space has become now a completely barricaded space, and there is a sense of privilege that exists. And I think I mean with what little I think I understood, uh, I might be wrong, but what you were trying to say usme there is a problem that when these fewer sets of people with the who have the privilege of ownership of a particular space come together to advocate for what they are seeing or what they are of their vicinities, there is that doesn't advocate for everybody who is experiencing that space or who is you know being in that space and experiencing it. And there is where the problems of hijack of the common also begins. I mean, because and I mean the Oval Maidan ka issue has been brought up so many times that I mean it just clicked, so I wanted to mention that.
There are different stakeholders in this, but the people who are seeing the space being used every day, they know there is an entire extension towards Navy Nagar before that Ganesh Nagar, where it is like a slum like situation. There is a police chowki right there at the end of um, that's the end of the line. Now they are proposing extension to Navy Nagar, but we proposed a play area, okay, like a basketball court, because they really need that space, and they want it, and the community also knows. I mean, the Cuff Parade residential associations also know that if we have to tap the youth's energy positively, we have to engage them into something. Otherwise, they will loiter around, because you have a long kilometer long plaza coming up there. Okay, so what do? They also don't want benches, okay, because they said we have fought against prostitution in our area, so we don't want benches. We do not want hawkers. So all these things are already there in the plan. Like the metro surface will not allow hawking. It is mentioned, okay, but then it goes to policing, because the hawkers will come. I mean, you have a catchment, the hawkers will come. So then it becomes policing. Then we are saying that in Europe cities, they're able to manage, accountability is higher, but here it just takes over. So then They wanted a design to use your sitting, your spaces in such a way that we said let them sit because they need to sit when they are traveling. You need pause points, but we do not want prolonged to increase the duration where you're using it like a house or you are just being there for a longer time. So the planters, the sittings were designed accordingly so that you do not get more encroachment, but there is still space for people to sit. And but again, what happened? Eventually, the government kicked out the basketball court from there. Okay, it was not the residents who kicked out because they know that those people will come and they will play any which ways. So why not give them a facility? So every time, the dialogue, sometimes they understand ki we have to provide. It is not always beautification from their end also. But the government also, they see as a non-revenue generating. We have to give the space to them. Why should we give? We'll give a reservation somewhere else because everything below that is going for retail. So the retail, the brands which will come, they will not agree to it, and the revenue from those brands will go to the government. So it's a very different cycle from where they think and from where the community thinks, or the person who is commuting, they will want a different usage. So again, I said it comes to again how much per capita spaces are there that you can use it for other things. Then people need not hold themselves on top of a metro station to have a date there.
We have one last question, and then we'll wrap up because we've
I
had
want
a
to.
long day. Continue outside.
Can I just speak about this little thing? I think the hijack happens because of poor intent. There's poor intent, and we allow the hijack to happen too. We don't protest enough. We don't question enough. So there's this example of this bridge in the Czech Republic, which was a little less used, and eventually people started saying that hey, no one's driving across this bridge, so they started doing yoga on this bridge, and then afterwards they started just barricading it and not letting cars pass, and then eventually it became a public pedestrian bridge. Can you imagine doing that to the coastal road or the sea link? I mean, the sea link is being used only 40% of what it is supposed to be used. So we can go and I can start cycling on it and say that, hey, make one cycle lane. But I don't. That's the problem.
This is not just a like I'm not asking any questions or anything. But this as a young practitioner, when I go to this towns, villages, Zilla Parishad, etc., to have a conversation with the either the IAS officer, IPS officer, etc. I you correctly pointed that they look at it as a sundar karna hai aapko yahan pe aake kuch sundarta karni hai. And sometimes how I look them, sometimes what I do is that I look them at a child, because you need to look them with that, it is a kid, it is going to say anything. And if we don't look at it as a something who is going to make mistakes, we won't be able to compete with them. Like we won't be able to make certain things in the surrounding. And as you said, you should not stop doing your 40%, because trust me, when I go to these places, I take your project inspirations and show to them, these things are happening, and that is why you need to give me projects so that I can do something about the community. And it has helped me, trust me. I think Kalpit's and Made in Mumbai's this thing, the toilet manifesto is something which I take a lot of times to these places to show them कि ऐसा होता है, and that is why I mean, kudos to you guys. I mean, you have laid a good path for us to move ahead, and that is why I wanted to thank you for on that part, So thank you so much.
I just respond to what Prasad said, no, about, and also what Pranav said. See, I don't think we can't just put the responsibility elsewhere. I think there are some problems with, I mean, the tools of urbanism that we have. Now, I think the commons is a lot about land, not ownership, but use. I mean, there's the value of ownership and value of use. I don't think any of the conventional or existing tools of urbanism deal with that at all. I mean, if you look at any development control rule anywhere in the world. I mean, you talk about land use, I mean, as in land of the use of the land which is owned, that the cadastral plot. You talk about architectural controls, and you talk about infrastructure development or planning for infrastructure. None of these three actually take care of the commons at all, right? We so in practice as well as in pedagogy, I think this is what we need to work on. Ki baba, these are the tools, but we need new tools, and we need new tools in our cities, because these tools do work well in Europe. They don't work well here. And we have not been able to put across those tools. I mean, all of us are giving small, tiny solutions here and there, but that is really like Band-Aid. I mean, that's really like a little bit of, painkiller without really addressing. I think it's high time that in pedagogy and in practice, we recognize that the tools that we have are not effective to the context in which we are operating, and evolve those new tools. I mean, and it's not a project; it's really a philosophy.
But also, you just said that they also do work even though they are the same sort of tools in Europe, right? Right. So that's what I was saying about intent. It's like you have a scalpel and you can make a nice incision or you can stab someone with it. It's like it's how you use that tool, and perhaps how you hone it also. You know, how is it actually sort of working?
No city in Europe has known the scale of urbanization that we are
Yes.
experiencing. There is not a single one.
Yeah, yeah. It's not
So
the size.
we should look at their good practices with a lot of skepticism.
Sure.
So that, yeah, I mean, the whole point is that we have a very different kind of economy, no? Like you have to, like what happened in Europe with this, the idea of heritage, for example, right, where cities became important. There was, all over Europe, America, there's a flight out of the city, right? And then cities became important again, and heritage became a tool. But that is because your economy had changed. You no longer had industries. Your industries have come here. We've gone to the third world, right? And so culture industry becomes the biggest thing. Culture industry is your biggest economy. That's what is getting you money. And so you can do what you can, right? Like you can afford to. All the taxes that you collect are going into making sure that your cities are beautiful enough for us to go there and spend money in, right? So then the question is to really look at what is your economy and how do you then facilitate it. If people have become entrepreneurs, then you have to provide for spaces for them to be there outside in the city, whatever, 9 to 5 or whatever cycle. The things have changed. No, you're not no longer than that 9 to 5 cycle. So I think the question is that if we start looking at, I look at the amount of money. If we say, extend the real estate can go wherever, I mean, FSI can go wherever, but densities is what you start looking at. You start, you kind of start looking at houses which are humongous. You'll have the same density, but houses for very, very rich people, right? And so then where do the small, where do people with small houses go, right? Like how do you? That's really kind of shifting them out of the city, whereas that's the place yeah. Or even if you talk about the homeless are not, are there because they don't have homes. But the way the homeless have negotiated that stopgap is to use the city in that way, right? Because otherwise they shifted into homeless shelters which are completely outside, that are outside all networks of economy, right, where they have nothing to do, and then they have to travel back to the city. So I think we have to look very, very closely at our processes of urbanization, our economy, and where that is going. And then you start designing instead of looking at models, which are completely of very different kind of economic frameworks, right?
challenge because in comparison to that, what we're dealing with in Mumbai is maybe fine tuning to some extent. But I think a bigger challenge is what is going to happen in the next 10 years across the country. And as kind of practitioners in this field, that is definitely something we need to start looking at. That where are these, kind of urbanized areas, the agglomerations happening, and how can we look at improving those so that they can actually function city-like rather than just appear to be city-like. So that is actually one of the kind of larger overarching study that we're even looking into at the moment.
Say
I have no
something.
questions. I just wanted to respond. He was just thanking us that for kudos to, and I just wanted to say that, Toilet Manifesto has very strong links with C because all these build projects, what you see I mean, there's a lot of work prepared. And we were just wondering, where do you, exhibit, what do you do about that work? And I was on a study trip, one of the C study trips with Prasad, and just opening the iPad and showing him, all this we have been working, and he's telling us, we are doing Venice Space in Jaipur. So just that, somebody found value in that work, and then rest all is kind of history. But it kind of had its seeds and origins in C in some way, because you won't believe we had taken Toilet Manifesto's work to some very reputed institutions and spoken about it, and we were questioned that what kind of title it is, literally like that. Okay, and so it's kind of interesting to see, so and somewhere it's, for us it was always, because we've been teaching, so all that we discuss in studios, we believe it can be brought into practice and vice versa. So that's there. And just want to add my kind of one comment, in the sense that in terms of public and the commons, which Prasad kind of opened up, there is a very serious denial which is there, and the common man's mind has been hijacked with certain images and aspirations. And I think what the reason we make so many drawings or models is something we believe that the act of a drawing is a political act, and the way you draw can really change the way one can look at things. And just the fact that you drew them can change the way the interventions would result into. So just one line example of Maulana Shaukat Ali Road project, which we won. The survey drawing provided by BMC for 1.5 kilometers just had light poles and road lines and gutters marked. But there was this complexity which was all around. So we actually drew 250 building and all those layers of complexity and madness to show them this is the reality. So let's deal with them rather than finding them illegal and no parking and exactly. So for all the work, what we do, really spend 50% of the time in really drawing what we are seeing and what the reality is. And that does half the work. And many times, like if you, in terms of numbers, you can say 1 out of 10 project is built. And over time, we have realized that it doesn't matter how many projects you build, but our agency of our agency also can play a very powerful role in the way you draw, you write, you publish, you exhibit, all these things, because that also plays a very powerful role rather than just showing this is the building I've made. So I think it does matter.
So much that we'll end the day with that, and I think that should also kind of it'll ease we are welcoming all of you to come to the exhibition, which is 10 years of work of C. It's not an exhibition; it is an archive. So you can't actually see it in one go. You have to keep coming back again and again. So we welcome you to keep coming, and I think with that we'll end the day. There's also dinner, which the fifth year students have organized for you and for everyone here. That's one way we kind of create a convivial space. Every day there is, in this week, one batch provides dinner to the whole C community and guests coming in. So thank you so much for coming.